When my own son told the nurse, "Don't waste time on her, she's already half dead," I lay motionless, betrayed by the very life I had created. Days later, I watched him faint as my true net worth was revealed. That's when I realized my greatest investment had yielded the poorest return, my own flesh and blood. If you're watching this story unfold, be sure to subscribe and comment if you've ever been betrayed by someone you sacrificed everything for. The ICU machines beeped in mechanical rhythm, a cold melody that had become the soundtrack to my existence. My body felt weak, but my mind remained sharp enough to hear every word spoken around me. The doctors had said I was recovering, but my son, Richard, clearly had other plans for my narrative. "Mom's been in and out for weeks," I heard him tell my nurse, Amelia, as they stood at the foot of my bed. His voice was hushed, but in the sterile quiet of the hospital room, every syllable reached me. The doctors say her heart could give out any day. That was a lie. My cardiologist had told me just yesterday that I was showing remarkable improvement. "She's tough," Amelia replied, adjusting my four. "I've seen patients bounce back from worse." Richard's sigh carried the weight of inconvenience, not concern. "Don't waste time on her. She's already half dead. Just keep her comfortable until, you know." The words pierced me deeper than any scalpel. My own son. The boy I had carried in my womb for 9 months. The child I had nursed through fevers and nightmares. The teenager I had supported through rebellion and heartbreak. The man whose education I had funded by working double shifts at the diner, my hands cracked and bleeding from harsh soaps and hot water. I wanted to sit up, to scream, to demand how he could speak of me as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient obligation. But my body betrayed me, just as my son had. I could only lie there, eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles, counting the to keep from drowning in the ocean of his betrayal. "Mr. Camden," Amelia's voice turned to ice, "your mother receives the same level of care as all our patients. And she can hear you." Richard scoffed. "She's been unresponsive for days. She doesn't know what's happening." Oh, but I did. I knew exactly what was happening. Richard wasn't just waiting for me to die, he was counting on it. For 3 more days, I lay in that hospital bed, watching my son perform grief for the nurses while making calls about my estate when he thought I was sleeping. I heard him talking about liquidating assets and finally getting what's coming to me. Each word was a knife twisting in my heart, but also a spark igniting something else within me: resolve. On the 4th day, my lawyer, Marcus Kendrick, came to visit. Marcus had been my husband Robert's best friend since college, and after Robert's death 5 years ago, he had become my most trusted confidant. "Eleanor," Marcus whispered, taking my hand, "the doctors say you're getting stronger. Can you hear me?" I squeezed his hand twice, our old signal for yes. "Good," he continued, leaning closer. "Richard has been trying to access information about the estate. He's claiming power of attorney, saying you're incapacitated. I've held him off, but he's persistent." Another squeeze from my hand. "I've scheduled the reading of Robert's supplemental will for next week, as you instructed before your hospitalization. Richard thinks it's the final distribution. He doesn't know about the amendments you and Robert made after his incident 3 years ago." The incident. Such a clinical term for the night Richard had drunkenly confessed he was only waiting for me to kick the bucket so he could sell the family business my husband and I had built from nothing. Robert had been devastated, but practical. That very week, we had restructured everything. Marcus patted my hand gently. "Rest and recover, Eleanor. Justice doesn't require your presence, just your survival." That night, for the first time since my collapse, I slept without nightmares. The conference room at Kendrick & Associates was paneled in rich mahogany, with a table long enough to seat the 20 people gathered for the reading. Richard sat at the far end, directly opposite Marcus, his posture radiating impatience. My daughter-in-law, Victoria, sat beside him, her face a mask of practiced sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. I had insisted on attending, despite my doctor's reservations. Seated in a wheelchair, an oxygen tank beside me, I must have looked like the dying woman Richard believed me to be. Perfect. "Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, adjusting his glasses. "We are here for the reading of the supplemental will of Robert Camden and the current will of Eleanor Camden, who is, as you can see, very much alive." Richard's eyes darted to me, surprise quickly masked by a tight smile. "Mother," he said, voice dripping with false concern. "Should you really be here? The stress can't be good for your recovery." "I wouldn't miss this for the world, Richard," I replied, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Marcus cleared his throat and began reading. "I, Robert Camden, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my supplemental will, to be enacted upon the death of my wife, Eleanor Camden, or upon her instruction, if she feels it necessary during her lifetime." Richard leaned forward, fingers drumming on the table. "My estate, including Camden Manufacturing, all associated properties, investments, and liquid assets, has been jointly held with my wife throughout our marriage. Upon my death, all pass to her control. This supplemental will concerns only the distribution of assets after both our deaths, or, as stated, at Eleanor's discretion." Marcus paused, taking a sip of water. The room was silent except for the soft hiss of my oxygen tank. The total value of the Camden estate, as of last valuation, stands at $87,426,000. A collective gasp filled the room. Richard's eyes widened, his mouth falling open. Even Victoria, normally so composed, clutched her husband's arm in shock. We had always lived comfortably, but modestly. The large Victorian house, the summer cottage by the lake, the European vacations, all markers of success, but not extraordinary wealth. What no one knew was that Robert had been a silent investor in a tech startup that had gone public 3 years before his death. That, combined with smart real estate investments and the consistent profit from Camden Manufacturing, had built a fortune far greater than anyone suspected. "This estate," Marcus continued, "is to be distributed as follows." Richard straightened his tie, composing himself. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the inheritance he had been counting on. The smirk that spread across his face made my blood run cold. "To my son, Richard Robert Camden." Richard's smirk widened. "I leave the sum of $1, in recognition of his status as my biological son, but in acknowledgement of his expressed desire to liquidate the family legacy, as witnessed by both myself and Eleanor at our 40th anniversary celebration." The smirk froze, then crumbled. Richard's face paled, then flushed crimson. "What?" he sputtered. "That's impossible. This is a mistake." Marcus continued, as if there had been no interruption. "To my daughter-in-law, Victoria Camden, I leave my collection of first edition novels, in hopes that she might find time to read something other than my bank statements, which she has been photographing during holiday visits for the past 5 years. Victoria's gasp was audible. Her hand flew to her throat, where a necklace, a gift from me last Christmas, sparkled obscenely. The remainder of my estate, including Camden Manufacturing and all associated holdings, is to be placed in the Eleanor Camden Trust, to be managed by the Board of Trustees named in Appendix A for the benefit of the following beneficiaries: the Camden Foundation for First-Generation College Students, the Robert and Eleanor Camden Wing of St. Mary's Hospital, and any other charitable organizations Eleanor deems worthy during her lifetime. Richard slammed his fist on the table. This is fraud. She's manipulated his will. She's not even competent to make these decisions. Marcus looked up calmly. Mr. Camden, I should remind you that I personally drafted this will with your father 5 years ago, and it was updated with your mother 2 years ago. Both were of extremely sound mind. Furthermore, your mother's medical team has certified that she is fully competent to manage her affairs. Then why the wheelchair? Why the oxygen? This is a performance. Richard was on his feet now, pointing at me accusingly. I'm recovering from pneumonia, Richard, I said quietly. Not dementia. Not incompetence. Just a lung infection that you hoped would kill me. The room fell silent. Richard's finger remained pointed at me, trembling slightly. You thought I couldn't hear you in the hospital, I continued, but I heard every word. Don't waste time on her. She's already half dead. Those were your exact words. weren't they? Richard's arm slowly lowered. His face had gone from red to ashen gray. Perhaps you'd like to know about the codicil your father added after you made that charming comment about kicking the bucket so you could sell the company. Section 12, Marcus, if you would. Marcus nodded and flipped several pages. Section 12. In the event that Richard Camden or any other potential heir demonstrates clear disregard for the well-being of Eleanor Camden, or expresses eagerness for her death for purposes of financial gain, such heir shall be immediately and permanently disqualified from receiving any portion of the estate beyond the nominal sum previously stated. Richard swayed slightly, his knuckles white as he gripped the table. "You can't do this," he whispered. "This is everything I've worked for." "No, Richard." I corrected him gently. "This is everything your father and I worked for. 60 years of early mornings and late nights, of missed vacations and secondhand clothes, of saving and investing and building something that would last beyond us." I leaned forward in my wheelchair. "What exactly have you worked for?" Before he could answer, his eyes rolled back in his head. His legs buckled, and he collapsed to the floor with a thud that seemed to echo through the stunned silence of the room. Victoria didn't move to help him. Instead, she was frantically texting on her phone, no doubt sharing the catastrophic news with whoever she had promised to keep informed. As Amelia, yes, I had specifically requested my hospital nurse attend as my medical aide, rushed to check Richard's pulse. Marcus quietly concluded the reading. "The will has been read and witnessed. Richard is medically stable but unconscious. This meeting is adjourned." The ride home from the lawyer's office was quiet. I had dismissed the medical transport service, opting instead to ride with Marcus in his sensible sedan. The oxygen tank was gone, a prop suggested by Amelia to reinforce Richard's perception of my frailty. "He'll contest it," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. "Let him," I replied, watching the familiar streets of my hometown slide past the window. "Every lawyer in the state will tell him it's ironclad. It's not the legal challenge I'm worried about, Eleanor." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You saw his face before he fainted. That wasn't just shock or disappointment. That was rage. I nodded slowly. "I know my son, Marcus, better than he thinks I do." We pulled into the circular driveway of my Victorian home. The gardens were in full bloom, a riot of color against the white clapboard siding. Robert had loved this house from the moment we'd first seen it, 53 years ago. Back then, we could barely afford the down payment. Now it was just one small piece of an empire Richard would never control. "I've arranged for security," Marcus said, helping me from the car. My legs were still weak from weeks in a hospital bed, but I refused the wheelchair now, just as a precaution. "Thank you." I patted his arm. "But I've taken some precautions of my own." Inside, the house was just as I had left it before my hospitalization, clean, orderly, filled with the collections of a lifetime. Photographs crowded the mantelpiece, chronicling a family's growth. Robert and me on our wedding day, Richard as a towhead toddler, family vacations, graduations, Richard and Victoria's wedding. The visual evidence of a life I thought we'd built together. Marcus insisted on checking every room before leaving, making sure the security system was armed and my phone was charged. "Call me if anything seems off," he instructed. "Anything at all." After he left, I walked slowly through the quiet house, reacquainting myself with a space that had been home for over 5 decades. In Richard's old bedroom, now a guest room, I paused. The baseball trophies were still displayed on the bookshelf. The Harvard diploma still hung on the wall. I had kept these things, these monuments to a son I had been so proud of. Had I missed the signs? Had there been moments when I should have seen the greed growing in him like a cancer? Or had Victoria's influence corrupted what was once good in him? The question circled in my mind as I made my way downstairs to make tea. The kitchen was my favorite room, spacious but cozy, with a breakfast nook overlooking the rose garden. As I waited for the kettle to boil, I noticed an envelope on the counter that hadn't been there when Marcus and I had checked the house. My name was written on it in Richard's distinctive handwriting. A chill ran through me despite the summer warmth. I picked up the envelope carefully, as if it might bite. Inside was a single sheet of paper, bearing just one sentence. If I can't inherit it, I'll destroy it. I sank into a chair, the threat ringing in my ears. Not a question, not a plea, not even an accusation, just a promise of destruction. The kettle whistled, an ordinary sound that seemed strangely discordant in the moment. I made my tea mechanically, mind racing. Richard had been in my house while we were at the will reading. He had a key, of course. I had never asked for it back. Never imagined I would need to. I called Marcus. He's been here, I said without preamble when he answered. Left a note. Marcus cursed, something I'd rarely heard him do. What did it say? I read it to him verbatim. I'm coming back, he said immediately. Pack a bag. You're not staying there tonight. No. I replied, my voice steady. I'm not running from my own home. Eleanor, be reasonable. He's threatened you. He's threatened the estate, not me personally. And I won't show fear. That's exactly what he wants. Marcus argued, but I held firm. Finally, he compromised. I'm sending over a security guard, and I'm calling Chief Williams. Richard should be picked up for questioning at the very least. I agreed to the security guard, but asked him to hold off on the police. Let me talk to Richard first, I said. He's angry and humiliated. Let's not make it worse until we have to. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, tea cooling before me, and tried to reconcile the son I had raised with the man who had written that threat. How had we come to this? When had money become more important to him than family? The security guard arrived within the hour, a former military man named Davis who was polite but vigilant. He did a thorough check of the property, changed the locks, and set up a temporary station in the front sitting room. His presence was reassuring, but also a stark reminder of how drastically things had changed in just a few hours. As night fell, I found myself unable to sleep. Instead, I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by his books and the subtle scent of his pipe tobacco that somehow lingered years after his death. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one with the false bottom that Richard knew nothing about, and removed a leather-bound journal. Robert had started keeping records of Richard's concerning behavior long before I had been willing to acknowledge it. The journal documented incidents dating back 15 years. Richard borrowing money without repayment. Richard bringing potential buyers to tour the manufacturing plant without our knowledge. Richard's drunken comments at family gatherings about his inheritance. Richard's gradual distancing from family traditions and responsibilities. The most damning entry was dated just 2 weeks before Robert's fatal heart attack. He had overheard Richard and Victoria discussing how they would renovate this old mausoleum once they finally got their hands on it. Richard had laughed and said, "Dad's too stubborn to die, and Mom's too blind to see what's right in front of her." I closed the journal, tears stinging my eyes. Robert had seen it all, had tried to warn me, but I had defended Richard, made excuses, insisted that deep down he was still the loving boy I had raised. My phone rang, startling me from my reverie. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Camden? A woman's voice, hesitant. It's Victoria.
Victoria Camden.
I sat up straighter.
Victoria.
What can I do for you at this hour? Her voice caught. I need to talk to you. It's about Richard. About what he's planning. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? Not over the phone. The fear in her voice seemed genuine. Can I come see you? Tomorrow morning. I hesitated. Was this a trap? Another scheme? Please, Victoria continued. I know you have no reason to trust me. But Richard is... He's not thinking clearly. I'm afraid of what he might do. Come at 9, I said finally. The front gate will be guarded. Come alone. After hanging up, I immediately called Marcus to update him. He was suspicious, as was I, but agreed that hearing Victoria out could provide valuable information. I'll be there too, he insisted. And I'm bringing my associate, Jennifer. She specializes in estate defense. I agreed, then tried again to sleep, but rest eluded me. Instead, I found myself drawn to the window, looking out at the property that had been my home for over half a century. The moonlight silvered the gardens and the old oak tree where we had hung a swing for Richard as a child. Beyond the immediate grounds, I could just make out the lights of the town where Camden Manufacturing employed over 300 people. All of this, the home, the business, the community we had helped build, Richard was willing to destroy out of spite. The thought sent a wave of determination through me. I had not built this life to see it torn apart by greed and entitlement. As dawn broke, I made a decision. Victoria's visit might be a trap or a genuine warning, but either way, I would be prepared. I went to the safe hidden behind Robert's collection of first editions and removed 2 items, a small recording device and a sealed envelope marked, in case of emergency. The morning brought a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I dressed carefully in a tailored suit that emphasized my recovered strength rather than any lingering weakness. By the time Marcus and Jennifer arrived at 8:30, I was on my second cup of coffee and had already briefed Davis on the expected visitor. "You look formidable," Marcus observed with approval. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone who's been underestimated," I replied, and is about to correct that misconception. Jennifer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, laid out a voice recorder and legal pad. "Mrs. Camden, I understand your daughter-in-law is coming with potentially concerning information about your son's intentions toward the estate?" That's what she indicated, yes. "And you've received a written threat?" I showed her the note. She photographed it, then placed it in an evidence bag. "This alone is enough for a restraining order if you want one." I considered it. Let's wait to hear what Victoria has to say. At precisely 9 o'clock, the security system announced a visitor at the gate. Davis checked the camera, confirmed it was Victoria alone, and admitted her. She looked different than she had at the will reading. Gone was the polished, confident socialite. This Victoria was pale, with shadows under her eyes and a nervousness to her movements that seemed uncharacteristic. "Mrs. Camden," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for seeing me." "These are my attorneys," I said, indicating Marcus and Jennifer. "Whatever you have to say can be said in front of them." Victoria nodded, twisting her wedding ring, a gaudy diamond that had replaced the simple band Richard had given her when they were young and, I had thought, in love. "Richard doesn't know I'm here," she began, accepting the coffee Marcus offered. "He thinks I'm at the spa. But after yesterday, after what happened at the reading..." She took a shaky breath. "He's planning something terrible." "Be specific," Jennifer prompted, pen poised above her legal pad. Victoria's eyes darted around the room before settling on me. "He's going to burn down the manufacturing plant. Tonight." The words hung in the air, as shocking as they were horrifying. "That's arson," Marcus said flatly. "And, with the night shift workers, potentially murder."
Victoria nodded miserably.
"He's not thinking straight. He keeps saying if he can't have it, no one will. That you've humiliated him for the last time." Her voice broke. I try to talk him out of it, but he's obsessed. He's already purchased accelerants and studied the security system. I felt sick. The plant employed hundreds of people, many of whom had worked for Camden Manufacturing for decades. Families depended on those jobs. And Richard was willing to destroy it all because his inheritance fantasy had been shattered. "Why are you telling us this?" Jennifer asked, her tone professionally skeptical. "You stood by him yesterday. You didn't seem shocked by his behavior." Victoria's carefully manicured hand shook as she set down her coffee cup. "Because I have a conscience," she snapped, then immediately looked contrite. "And because I'm not going down with him. We're finished." "You're leaving him?" I asked, surprised despite everything. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Last night was... I saw a side of him I can't unsee. The things he said about you, about the workers at the plant, about everyone who's ever helped him."
She shuddered.
"I made mistakes. I encouraged his worst impulses. I thought the money would make us happy. But this..." She gestured helplessly. "This is criminal. This is evil." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. But the fear in her eyes seemed genuine, as did the slight tremor in her hands. "We need to call the police," Marcus said firmly. Victoria's head snapped up. "You can't. Not yet. He'll know I warned you. He has friends who would hurt me." "Then what do you suggest?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. She pulled a folded paper from her purse and spread it on the coffee table. It was a schematic of the manufacturing plant. He plans to enter through the service door at 2 a.m., she explained, pointing. The night security guard takes his break then. Richard has a key card he duplicated months ago. He'll plant the devices here, here, and here. She indicated 3 points on the diagram, set to ignite at 3 a.m. when the night shift is at minimum staffing. Jennifer was taking rapid notes while Marcus photographed the schematic with his phone. This is detailed planning, I observed. When did he come up with all this? Victoria wouldn't meet my eyes. He's had it as a contingency plan for a while, in case you ever crossed him. The casual evil of it. My own son having a plan to destroy the family business if I ever disobeyed his wishes, left me momentarily speechless. I have proof, Victoria added, pulling out her phone. I recorded him last night when he was drunk and ranting. She pressed play, and Richard's voice filled the room, slurred but unmistakable. The old witch thinks she's won, thinks she can humiliate me and get away with it. Well, tomorrow night it all burns. The plant, the legacy, all of it. Let's see how she likes watching 50 years of hard work go up in smoke. And if anyone gets hurt, that's on her. She should have just died quietly like she was supposed to. Davis, who had been standing discreetly by the door, stepped forward. Ma'am, we need to contact the authorities immediately. This is a credible threat to life and property. I nodded, my decision made. Victoria, I appreciate you coming forward, but we need to involve the police. We can request protection for you if you're concerned about retaliation. She hesitated, then nodded. I'll cooperate. I've already packed a bag. I'm not going back to him. As Davis called Chief Williams and Jennifer prepared a formal statement for Victoria to sign, I found myself staring at the family photographs on the mantelpiece. The smiling boy in those images. When had he turned into a man who could contemplate such destruction? Had that darkness always been there, hidden behind the smile I had so loved? Within the hour, my quiet home had become a hub of police activity. Chief Williams, a longtime friend, took my statement personally. Officers photographed the threatening note and collected Victoria's recording. A detective interviewed each of us separately, building a case that would justify Richard's immediate arrest. We'll pick him up within the hour, Chief Williams assured me. And we'll have extra security at the plant, just in case. Victoria, now officially under police protection, prepared to leave for a safe house.
At the door, she paused.
Mrs. Camden, she said hesitantly. I know this doesn't make up for anything, but... She pulled a flash drive from her purse. This has copies of all the financial documents Richard's been hiding from you. Accounts in the Caymans. Investment properties. Money he's been siphoning from the company for years. I took the drive, our fingers briefly touching. Thank you for doing the right thing, Victoria. Even if it's late. She nodded, eyes downcast.
I'm sorry. For everything.
I got caught up in who I thought Richard was, or who I wanted him to be. I never thought it would go this far. After she left with her police escort, I sat heavily on the sofa, the flash drive clutched in my hand. We should have the IT team examine that before you look at it, Marcus cautioned. It could be corrupted. I handed it to him wordlessly. The adrenaline that had carried me through the morning was ebbing, leaving me drained. Jennifer sat beside me, her legal pad filled with notes. Mrs. Camden, once Richard is arrested, we'll need to file for an emergency protective order, and there will likely be a bail hearing as early as tomorrow. I nodded, trying to focus on the practical steps ahead rather than the emotional devastation of having my son arrested for conspiracy to commit arson and potentially murder. My phone rang. Chief Williams. We've got him, Eleanor, he said without preamble. Caught him at a hardware store buying more accelerant. He's being processed now. Was there any trouble? I asked, thinking of the rage I had glimpsed before Richard fainted. No resistance, Williams replied. But Eleanor, he's asking to see you. Says he can explain everything. I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. Not today, Jim. I can't face him today. Understood. We'll keep him in custody at least until the bail hearing. You get some rest. After the chief hung up, Marcus squeezed my shoulder gently. You've done everything right, Eleanor. The plant is safe. The employees are safe. You're safe. But as I looked around my home, the home where I had raised a son who had grown into a man capable of such calculated cruelty, I didn't feel safe. I felt a profound grief that no legal victory could assuage. I think I need some time alone, I told Marcus and Jennifer. Davis is still here, and the police have the house under surveillance. I'll be fine. They left reluctantly, extracting promises that I would call if I needed anything at all. After they were gone, I moved slowly through the house, touching familiar objects, trying to reconnect with the life I had built and nearly lost. In Robert's study, I opened his journal again, turning to the final entry, written the day before his death. Eleanor still can't see what Richard has become. She remembers the boy, not the man. I've done what I can to protect her and the legacy we've built together. I only hope it's enough. If she's reading this after I'm gone, know this, my love. You are stronger than you believe. Trust your instincts. And remember that the family we choose can be more loyal than the family we're born with. A tear splashed onto the page. I closed the journal carefully and returned it to its hiding place. Robert had been right. I had been blind to what Richard had become. But now my eyes were open, and there would be no going back to comfortable illusions. As evening fell, I made a simple dinner and ate it at the kitchen table, surrounded by the gathering darkness. The house felt different now, tainted by the knowledge that my son had been plotting against me within these very walls. The doorbell rang just as I was washing my dinner plate. Davis checked the security camera, then called out, "It's Marcus, Mrs. Camden." I opened the door to find my lawyer looking grim. "What's happened?" I asked, instantly alert. "Richard made bail," he said without preamble. His college roommate, Judge Hastings, said it unusually low despite the prosecutor's objections. My stomach dropped. "Where is he now?" "Police are monitoring him, but legally, he's free until trial. I've filed for an emergency restraining order, but it won't be processed until morning." Marcus stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind him. "I don't think you should stay here tonight." I thought of Richard's threat. If I can't inherit it, I'll destroy it, and felt a chill despite the summer warmth. "He won't come here," I said, trying to convince myself as much as Marcus. "Not with Davis here, and the police watching." Marcus didn't look reassured. "Eleanor, he's desperate and angry. Rational calculations might not apply." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You think you've won, Mother? The game is just beginning. Sleep well." I stared at the text message, my fingers trembling against the cool glass of my phone screen. The threat was unmistakable, the sender undeniable. My own son, promising retribution from the shadows. If you're watching this story unfold, subscribe now and comment if you've ever had to face someone who was supposed to love you but chose vengeance instead. Eleanor. Marcus's voice seemed to come from far away. "What is it?" Wordlessly, I handed him the phone. His face darkened as he read the message. "That's it," he said firmly. "Pack a bag. You're coming to my house tonight. Jennifer's already there setting up the guest room." For the first time, I didn't resist. The text message had pierced the last of my denial. Richard wasn't just angry or disappointed, he was dangerous. "Give me 15 minutes, I said, already moving toward the stairs. In my bedroom, I packed mechanically, choosing practical clothes and essential medications. As I zipped the overnight bag, my eyes fell on the photograph beside my bed, Richard at his college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride and possibility. I hesitated, then placed the frame face down in the drawer of my nightstand. The drive to Marcus's suburban home was tense, both of us scanning for any sign that we were being followed. Davis followed in a separate car, having refused to leave my security to chance. The night was oddly beautiful, stars pricking the velvet sky, a gentle breeze stirring the trees, making the menace of Richard's text seem even more jarring. "We'll file for a permanent restraining order first thing tomorrow," Marcus said as we pulled into his driveway. "And I've contacted the prosecutor to report the text." It's a clear violation of his bail conditions. I nodded absently, my mind elsewhere. Something Victoria had said that morning kept returning to me. He's had it as a contingency plan for a while, in case you ever crossed him. How long had Richard been planning for the possibility of my defiance? What other contingencies might he have in place? Jennifer greeted us at the door, her professional demeanor softened by genuine concern. "Mrs. Camden, I've prepared the guest suite. There's tea waiting if you'd like some." The kindness of these two people, technically my employees, but in truth among the few real friends I had left, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I managed, allowing Jennifer to take my bag. Marcus's home was modern and elegant, all clean lines and muted colors. Nothing like my Victorian with its layers of memory and history. Perhaps that was a blessing tonight. After a cup of chamomile tea that did little to calm my nerves, I excused myself to the guest suite. Sleep seemed impossible, but I went through the motions of my nightly routine, clinging to normalcy in the face of chaos. I was just settling into the unfamiliar bed when my phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "Check the Camden manufacturing security cameras.
Now."
My heart raced. Was this another threat or something worse? I called out for Marcus, who appeared in the doorway almost instantly. Richard sent another text. I explained, showing him the message. "Can we access the factory security system remotely?" Marcus frowned. "Yes, through the company's secure server. I have access on my laptop." Minutes later, we were hunched over his computer in the home office, logging into the Camden manufacturing security system. The main screen showed a grid of camera feeds, the production floor, quiet and still for the night shift break, the loading docks, the executive offices, the perimeter gates. "Everything looks normal," Jennifer observed, peering over our shoulders. Then I noticed it, a flicker of movement on camera 12, covering the east entrance. "There," I pointed. "Can you enlarge that feed?" Marcus clicked on the image, expanding it to fill the screen. The night vision camera showed a figure in dark clothing slipping through the service door, the same door Victoria had pointed out on the schematic. "That's Richard," I whispered, recognizing his movements even in the grainy footage. "He's going through with it, despite the arrest." "I'm calling 911, Jennifer said, already reaching for her phone. "Wait." Marcus held up a hand. "Look." A second figure had appeared on the screen, following Richard through the door. Then a third, all dressed in dark clothing, moving with purpose. "He's not alone," I said, dread pooling in my stomach.
"Who are those people?"
Marcus was already dialing. "Chief Williams, directly," he explained. "This is beyond a standard emergency call." As Marcus reported what we were seeing, I kept my eyes fixed on the security feeds. The three figures moved through the factory with practiced efficiency, clearly familiar with the layout. Richard led them to the main production floor, where the most expensive equipment was housed. "They've got bags," Jennifer pointed out. "Are those the incendiary devices Victoria mentioned?" But something didn't add up. The arson plan had been scheduled for 2 a.m., targeting the night shift at minimum staffing. It was barely 10:30 p.m., and according to the duty roster displayed on another monitor, there were no workers in the building, just 2 security guards making their rounds at the opposite end of the complex. This isn't about burning it down, I realized suddenly. This is about stealing intellectual property, prototype designs, anything he can use to damage the company without destroying it. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Richard wasn't just lashing out in rage. He was executing a calculated plan to undermine Camden manufacturing from within. The arson threat had been a diversion, or perhaps a backup plan. "Chief Williams and his team are 7 minutes out," Marcus reported, ending his call. "They're approaching without sirens to avoid alerting the intruders." We watched, helpless, as Richard and his accomplices entered the research and development lab. One of them immediately went to the computer terminals while the other began photographing the prototype assembly on the main workbench. "That's the new precision valve system," I said, recognizing the half-completed device. "It's patent pending. If those designs leak to our competitors, it would devastate the company," Marcus finished grimly. Richard, meanwhile, was accessing the executive office area. We switched to that camera feed and watched as he used a key he shouldn't have had, to enter my private office. How does he have access? Jennifer asked. I thought all his credentials were revoked after the arrest. They were, I confirmed, a sick feeling growing in my chest. But he must have made copies. Or, a worse thought occurred to me. Or he has someone on the inside. Someone still loyal to him. On screen, Richard went straight to my office safe, hidden behind a landscape painting. He punched in a code, and to my horror, the safe swung open. That's impossible, I breathed. I changed that code after Robert died. Richard never knew it, but clearly he did. As we watched, he removed several folders and a small hard drive, the backup of all Camden Manufacturing's proprietary designs and financial records. This is corporate espionage, Jennifer said. On top of breaking and entering, violating bail conditions, and conspiracy. I barely heard her. I was watching my son methodically betraying not just me, but the legacy his father and I had built over a lifetime. The company that employed hundreds of people. The innovation that had made Camden a respected name in manufacturing. The police are on site, Marcus reported, checking his phone. They're securing the perimeter before moving in. On screen, Richard suddenly froze, his head tilting as if listening. He said something to his accomplices, who immediately began packing up their materials. They'd been tipped off. Someone warned them, I said, fury replacing shock. Someone is monitoring the police frequencies. We watched, frustrated, as Richard and his team moved quickly toward the west exit, away from where the police were staging their entry from the east. They're going to get away, Jennifer said, her voice tight with anger. But at that moment, a new figure appeared on the west exit camera, a uniformed security guard, weapon drawn, blocking the exit. That's Davis, Marcus exclaimed. He must have gone there directly from my house. Davis stood firm as Richard and his accomplices approached. We couldn't hear the exchange, but the body language was clear. Davis ordering them to stop, Richard gesturing angrily. Then everything happened at once. One of Richard's accomplices lunged at Davis. There was a brief struggle, a flash. Davis staggered back, clutching his shoulder. Oh my God, I gasped. They shot him. The three intruders bolted past the injured guard, disappearing from the camera's view. Moments later, police officers flooded into frame, some pursuing the fleeing suspects, others rushing to Davis's aid. Marcus was already heading for the door, car keys in hand. I'm going to the hospital, he called over his shoulder. Davis took that bullet protecting your company, Eleanor. I'm not letting him wake up alone. I'm coming with you, I insisted, grabbing my coat. Jennifer shook her head. It's not safe, Mrs. Camden. Richard is still out there, and he's clearly desperate. Davis put himself in harm's way for me, I said firmly. I won't hide while he's bleeding. The argument ended when Marcus's phone rang. Chief Williams again. Marcus listened, his expression shifting from tension to relief. They've apprehended 2 of the intruders, he reported after ending the call. Richard got away, but they know what vehicle he's in. It's just a matter of time. And Davis? I pressed. Flesh wound to the shoulder. He's being transported to Memorial Hospital. Conscious and stable. The news eased some of my immediate fear, but the larger horror remained. My son was now a fugitive, wanted for corporate espionage and assault. And he had the company's intellectual property with him. We need to warn the patent attorneys, I said, practicality asserting itself through the emotional haze. Get injunctions ready in case he tries to sell the designs. Jennifer nodded. I'll start making calls. And we should bring in IT security to change all access codes and passwords. I want to see Davis first, I insisted. Then we can focus on damage control. Memorial Hospital's emergency department was a fluorescent-lit maze of curtained bays and hushed voices. Davis had already been treated and moved to a short-stay unit by the time we arrived. He looked pale but alert, his left shoulder heavily bandaged. Mrs. Camden, he greeted me, attempting to sit up straighter. You shouldn't be here. It's not secure. Lie still, I admonished gently. And don't worry about me. I'm more concerned about you right now. Davis grimaced. I should have waited for backup. But when I saw Mr. Richard on the security feed, he shook his head. I couldn't let him walk away with company property. Not after everything. I took his hand, his right one, away from the injured side. You were brave, Davis. Too brave, perhaps. But I'm grateful. A police officer stationed outside the room stepped in. Mrs. Camden? Chief Williams would like a word, if you're available. Jim Williams looked exhausted when I met him in the hospital corridor. 20 years as police chief in our small city had etched permanent lines around his eyes, but tonight they seemed deeper than usual. Eleanor, he greeted me, dispensing with formalities as he always did when we were alone. We'd known each other since high school. He'd even briefly dated my younger sister before meeting his wife. I'm sorry about all this. Have you found Richard? I asked, getting straight to the point. He shook his head. Not yet. But we've identified his accomplices, 2 men with records for industrial espionage. Profissionals. This wasn't some impulsive act, Eleanor. Richard planned this carefully. The confirmation of what I already suspected still landed, like a blow. What about the stolen materials? The men aren't talking yet. But based on what they had when we arrested them, we believe Richard has the hard drive and the prototype photographs. I closed my eyes briefly. Enough to do serious damage. Jim nodded grimly. We've alerted state police and the FBI. Corporate espionage crosses state lines, makes it federal. They're treating this as a priority. Thank you, I said, suddenly feeling every one of my 78 years. For everything, Jim. He squeezed my shoulder. We'll find him, Eleanor. And when we do, there won't be any friendly judges to set low bail. This is serious time he's looking at. The thought of my son in prison brought no satisfaction, only a profound sadness. But I pushed the emotion aside. There would be time for grief later. Now I needed to focus on protecting what remained. I'd like to go back to Marcus's house, I told him. We need to coordinate with the company's security team, make sure there are no other vulnerabilities Richard might exploit. Jim assigned 2 officers to escort us back to Marcus's home. The night that had begun with a threatening text message had escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. My son was now a fugitive, armed and dangerous. The company was at risk. And somehow, I had to find the strength to keep moving forward. Dawn was breaking by the time we finished implementing emergency security protocols for Camden Manufacturing. Every access code had been changed, every password reset. The IT team had isolated the network, limiting potential damage from any data Richard might have stolen. The patent attorneys were prepared to file injunctions at the first sign of our intellectual property appearing on the market. I sat at Marcus's kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee before me, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. It seemed wrong, somehow, that the world could still produce such beauty while my life was crumbling around me. You should try to rest, Jennifer said, joining me at the table. She looked as exhausted as I felt, her normally immaculate appearance rumpled from the all-night strategy session. I can't, I admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see Richard's face on that security camera. So cold. So calculating. I shook my head. How did I not see what he was becoming? Jennifer's hand covered mine. We see what we want to see in the people we love. It's human nature. Before I could respond, Marcus entered the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear. His expression was tense as he listened to whoever was on the other end. When he asked sharply, "Are you sure?" Another pause. "No, don't do anything. I'll tell her myself." He ended the call, his face grim. "What is it?" I asked, dread knotting my stomach. "That was our head of security at the plant," Marcus said, sitting heavily across from me. "Richard has made contact." My heart seemed to stop. "What do you mean? He's been apprehended?"
No.
Marcus pushed his phone across the table to me. On the screen was an email addressed to every member of the Camden Manufacturing executive team, to the leadership of Camden Manufacturing. By now you're aware that I have acquired certain proprietary information and designs belonging to the company. What you may not know is that I've also documented years of creative accounting, tax evasion, and regulatory violations orchestrated by my mother and her late husband. I am prepared to release all of this information to competitors, to the press, to federal authorities, unless my demands are met. 1. My mother will publicly announce her retirement, effective immediately. 2. The board will appoint me as CEO and controlling shareholder. 3. All criminal charges against me will be dropped. You have 24 hours to comply. For every hour past the deadline, I will release one damaging document to the press. This is not a negotiation. Richard Camden. I read the email twice, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. This is blackmail, Jennifer said, reading over my shoulder. And those allegations, they're completely false. Are they? I asked quietly. Marcus looked startled. Eleanor, you can't possibly think. Not me, I clarified. Not Robert. But Richard had increasing financial control in the last 5 years of Robert's life. He was chief financial officer. If there were creative accounting practices, they would have happened under his authority. Understanding dawned on Marcus's face. He's threatening to expose his own crimes and pin them on you. Exactly. I felt a strange calm settling over me. The shock was receding, replaced by cold clarity. He thinks I'll sacrifice myself to protect the company's reputation, that I'll give him what he wants rather than risk public scandal. What are you going to do? Jennifer asked. I stood up, smoothing down my rumpled clothes with hands that no longer trembled. I'm going to call his bluff. Marcus, contact the board members. I want an emergency meeting in 2 hours. Jennifer, get me everything we have on Richard's financial activities at the company, especially after Robert became ill. You're not considering giving in? Marcus asked, alarmed. No, I said firmly. I'm considering going to war. Richard wants to play chicken with me? Let's see who swerves first. As Marcus and Jennifer hurried to execute my instructions, I moved to the window, watching the neighborhood come to life in the early morning light. Somewhere out there, my son was hiding, believing he held all the cards. But he had made a critical miscalculation. He thought I was still the mother who would sacrifice anything to protect him. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The Camden Manufacturing boardroom was tense when I entered 2 hours later. The 10 board members, some in person, others joining via video conference, looked worried and confused. Most had been awakened by Marcus's urgent summons, with little explanation beyond. Emergency meeting requested by Mrs. Camden. I had taken time to shower and change into fresh clothes Marcus had sent someone to retrieve from my home. I needed to project strength now, not the exhaustion I felt bone deep. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I began, taking my seat at the head of the table. I apologize for the dramatic timing, but we face an unprecedented situation. I outlined the events of the past 24 hours, Richard's break-in, the stolen materials, Davis's injury, and finally, the blackmail attempt. The board members' expressions ranged from shock to outrage to fear. This is extortion, said Harold Winston, our longest-serving board member and an old friend of Robert's. We should involve the FBI immediately. We already have, I assured him. But Richard's threat presents a more immediate problem. He's given us 24 hours before he begins releasing what he claims is evidence of financial impropriety. Is there any truth to his allegations? Asked Diane Miller, one of our newer board members, her tone carefully neutral. None whatsoever, I said firmly. Camden Manufacturing has always operated with complete financial transparency and integrity. However, I glanced at Jennifer, who nodded encouragingly. We have reason to believe Richard himself may have engaged in questionable practices during his tenure as CFO. I nodded to Jennifer, who distributed folders to each board member. These are preliminary findings from an internal audit we began 6 months ago, after discrepancies were noted in certain international transactions. We kept the investigation quiet to avoid tipping off anyone involved. Now we know why those discrepancies existed. The board members flipped through the documents, their expressions growing darker. These offshore accounts, Winston said, looking up sharply. They're all linked to shell companies controlled by Richard? I nodded. Approximately $12 million has been diverted over the past 4 years. Small enough amounts each time to avoid triggering automatic alerts, but substantial in aggregate. So, he's not just threatening to expose non-existent crimes, Miller observed. He's threatening to expose his own crimes and frame you for them. Precisely, I confirmed. And he believes I'll capitulate rather than risk the company's reputation. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. Then Winston slammed his hand on the table. "The hell with that," he growled. "Eleanor, I've known you and Robert for 40 years. There isn't a more ethical business owner in the state. No one who matters will believe these allegations. But the press will run with them," Miller pointed out pragmatically. "Markets don't respond to truth. They respond to perception. Our stock could take a significant hit. Which is why I've called this meeting," I said, leaning forward. "I'm not surrendering to Richard's demands. But I need the board's unanimous support for the counteroffensive I'm planning." For the next hour, we strategized. The plan that emerged was bold, risky, but potentially devastating to Richard's scheme. By the time we adjourned, every board member was on board, their initial fear replaced by resolved determination. As the others filed out, Winston lingered, his weathered face creased with concern. "You know this means publicly denouncing your own son," he said quietly. "Are you prepared for that, Eleanor?" I met his gaze steadily. "The man threatening this company is not my son, Harold. My son died somewhere along the way, and I was too blind to notice. This man, this criminal, is a stranger wearing his face." Winston squeezed my shoulder. "Robert would be proud of you. And heartbroken, too." Yes, I agreed, feeling the weight of both those truths. Just like me. After Winston left, I remained in the boardroom alone, gathering my strength for what was to come. The next 24 hours would determine not just the future of Camden Manufacturing, but the complete unraveling of the family I had once cherished. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Richard again. Tick-tock, mother. 20 hours left. Are you ready to sign over your empire, or shall I start sending those files to the Wall Street Journal?" I didn't respond. Instead, I called Chief Williams. "Jim," I said when he answered. "It's time to activate the trace." "He's making contact again." "Copy that," the chief replied. "Keep him talking if he calls. We need at least 45 seconds to triangulate his location." I ended the call just as my phone rang, the same unknown number. Taking a deep breath, I answered. "Hello, Richard." "Mother." His voice was cool, controlled. Not the ranting of a desperate fugitive, but the calculated tone of someone who believed he held all the power. "Have you considered my offer?" "I have," I replied, matching his calm. "The board and I find it unacceptable." A pause. "That's disappointing. I thought you'd be more pragmatic, more concerned with preserving the Camden legacy." "Oh, I am very concerned with the Camden legacy," I assured him, "which is why I cannot allow it to fall into the hands of a thief and a blackmailer." His laugh was sharp, humorless. Strong words from a woman who built her fortune on tax evasion and accounting fraud. "We both know those allegations are false, Richard, just as we both know who really established those offshore accounts." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its confidence. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can," I countered. "The internal audit we began 6 months ago has been quite illuminating. The board has seen the evidence. The FBI has seen it too." "You're bluffing," he snapped, but I could hear the first tremor of uncertainty. "Am I?" I kept my voice level, even as I checked my watch. 30 seconds. I needed to keep him talking a bit longer. "Tell me, Richard, did you really think I wouldn't notice the discrepancies? That I would just hand over the company my husband and I built because you threatened me? This isn't a game, Mother." His voice had hardened again. "I have the prototype designs. I have the hard drive. By this time tomorrow, your precious company will be worthless." "You overestimate the value of those designs," I lied smoothly. "And you underestimate me. Always have." "We'll see about that." The line went dead. I immediately called Chief Williams. "Did you get it?" Partial trace, he reported. Not precise enough for an arrest warrant, but we've narrowed it to a 3-block radius in the warehouse district. My officers are canvassing the area now. It wasn't ideal, but it was progress. Richard was still in the city, still within reach of the law. And now he knew I wasn't going to surrender quietly. I left the boardroom and found Marcus waiting in the anteroom, concern etched on his face. Richard called. I told him. Police got a partial trace. And I think I rattled him. Good, Marcus said grimly. The press conference is set for 3 p.m. That gives us 4 hours to finalize the statement and brief security. The press conference had been Jennifer's idea, a preemptive strike against Richard's threatened revelations. Instead of waiting for him to release damaging documents, we would go public first, revealing the evidence of his embezzlement and setting the narrative on our terms. It was a risky strategy. Once I publicly accused my son of financial crimes, there would be no going back. Our family's dirty laundry would be aired for all to see. But it was the only way to neutralize his leverage. I need to go home first, I told Marcus. Change into something more appropriate for television. And there's something in Robert's study I need. Marcus frowned. Is that safe? Richard could be watching the house. The police have it under surveillance, I reminded him. And I won't be alone. I gestured to the 2 officers who had been assigned as my security detail. Besides, I doubt Richard would risk showing his face in broad daylight, not when every cop in the state is looking for him. Marcus didn't look convinced, but he nodded. I'll come with you. Jennifer can finish the press statement. The drive to my home was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The police cruiser followed discreetly behind us, a reminder of how drastically my life had changed in just 24 hours. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed something odd. The curtains in the front parlor window were drawn. I always left them open during the day to let in the light. Something's wrong, I said quietly to Marcus. The curtains shouldn't be closed. Marcus immediately put the car in reverse, but before he could back out of the driveway, the front door opened. Richard stood in the doorway, a gun in his hand. Come in, Mother, he called, his voice carrying across the lawn. We have some family business to discuss. The police officers in the cruiser had spotted him too. They were out of their vehicle, weapons drawn, taking cover behind their car doors. Richard Camden, one shouted. Drop your weapon and put your hands up. Richard smiled, a cold, empty expression that sent chills down my spine. I don't think so. Mother, you have 5 seconds to come inside before I start shooting at your friends here. Don't do it, Eleanor, Marcus hissed, gripping my arm. He's desperate. Cornered.
He was right.
The rational response would be to let the police handle this, to stay safely in the car while they negotiated or forced a resolution. But as I looked at the man standing in my doorway, the stranger wearing my son's face, I made a different choice. I'm going in, I said quietly. Eleanor, no. He won't hurt me, I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced of that myself. Not physically. He needs me alive to sign over the company. Before Marcus could stop me, I opened the car door. I'm coming, Richard, I called. Tell the police to hold their fire. Richard gestured with the gun. Officers, if you want Mrs. Camden to stay healthy, you'll back off.
Now.
The police hesitated, clearly reluctant to give ground to an armed suspect. It's all right, I assured them, my voice steadier than I felt. I'll be fine, Richard, and I just need to talk. As I walked slowly toward my son, time seemed to stretch and distort. I was acutely aware of every detail, the weight of my handbag on my shoulder, the crunch of gravel under my shoes, the cool September breeze against my face. It might be the last time I felt these sensations. Yet fear had been replaced by a strange, detached calm. That's far enough, Richard said when I was halfway up the walk. Tell your lawyer and the police to leave.
Now.
I turned to Marcus, who was watching with undisguised horror. Go, I called. I'll be all right. Eleanor. Go, Marcus. Please. After a moment of visible struggle, Marcus nodded. He got back in his car but left the engine off, a silent statement that he wasn't going far. The police too, Richard insisted. I looked at the officers, who were waiting for my signal. "Please," I said, "give us some space. I'll call if I need help." Reluctantly, they retreated to the street, still keeping my house in view, but no longer in an offensive position. "Inside," Richard ordered, stepping back to let me pass. I walked into my own home as if entering a stranger's house, hyper-aware of potential dangers. Richard closed the door behind me, the lock engaging with an ominous click. The parlor was just as I had left it the previous night, except for the drawn curtains and a laptop open on the coffee table. Richard gestured for me to sit on the sofa. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, Mother," he said, keeping the gun casually pointed in my direction as he took the armchair opposite me. "I could say the same about you," I replied, setting my handbag beside me. Inside was my phone set to record. Breaking into the factory, stealing company property, shooting a security guard, blackmailing the board. Not exactly the behavior I raised you to exhibit. Richard's laugh was harsh. Always the disappointed mother. Never seeing that you and Dad were the problem all along. "How exactly were we the problem, Richard?" I asked, genuinely curious about the justification he had constructed for his actions. "By building a successful company? By providing you with every advantage? By never giving me what was rightfully mine," he snapped, the facade of control cracking. "I was the son,
The heir.
but you and Dad never trusted me with real power. Always looking over my shoulder, questioning my decisions, undermining my authority with the board." I stared at him, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time. "We gave you the position of CFO when you were barely 30. We funded your MBA at Harvard. We introduced you to every important contact we had. How is that not trusting you with power?" "It was never enough," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "You held the real control, the voting shares, the final say. I was just a glorified employee in my own family's company." The distortion in his worldview was staggering. Had he always felt this entitled, this resentful? Had I simply refused to see it? "The company was never your birthright, Richard," I said firmly. "It was something your father and I built through decades of hard work. Something we hoped you would earn the right to lead, not demand as an entitlement." Richard's grip on the gun tightened. "Save the lectures. We're past that now." "Yes," I agreed sadly. "We are. So, what happens next? You force me to sign over control at gunpoint? Do you really think that will hold up legally?" "It doesn't have to," he replied, a smirk forming. "I just needed to hold up long enough to implement my plan." "Which is?" He gestured to the laptop. "Selling Camden manufacturing to Westridge Industries. They've wanted our technology for years. With the prototype designs and the hard drive I took last night, they're prepared to pay a premium if the deal closes this week." Westridge Industries, our largest competitor. The company that had tried to poach our top engineers. The company that had been accused of corporate espionage against other manufacturers. "They'll dismantle everything we've built," I said, the full horror of his plan dawning on me. "Lay off the workers. Strip the assets. Absorb the patents." Richard shrugged. "Business is business. I walk away with 80 million and you get to retire in peace. Or prison if you don't cooperate. And what about the Camden legacy you claim to care about? The 300 families who depend on those jobs." "Not my problem," he said coldly. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Marcus and tell him to bring the transfer paperwork here. Then you're going to sign over your controlling interest to me. After that, I'll decide whether to let you walk away or face charges for the creative accounting I've documented so meticulously." I studied my son's face. The face I had once kissed goodnight, had beamed at across graduation ceremonies, had trusted implicitly. It was the same face, but the person behind it was unrecognizable. "No," I said simply. Richard blinked, as if he couldn't process my refusal. "Excuse me?" I said, "No, Richard. I will not sign over the company. I will not surrender to blackmail. And I certainly will not allow you to destroy everything your father and I built." His face darkened. "You don't seem to understand the situation, Mother. I have a gun. I have evidence that could send you to prison. I have the only copy of the prototype designs. I allowed myself a small smile. Actually, you don't. The designs you stole were decoys, simplified versions we keep on the main server specifically to mislead industrial spies. The real designs are secured elsewhere. This was a bluff. The designs he had stolen were indeed the real ones. But the flash of uncertainty in his eyes told me the lie had landed. "You're lying," he said, but without conviction. "Am I?" "Test it. Show the designs to Westridge. See if their engineers can make sense of them without the proprietary algorithms that aren't on that hard drive." Richard's confident smirk faltered. "It doesn't matter. I still have enough to damage the company beyond repair. One call to the SEC about those offshore accounts." "The ones in your name?" I finished for him. "The ones that our internal audit has already documented and reported to the FBI? Those offshore accounts." Richard's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" If you're watching this story unfold, subscribe and share it with someone who appreciates how sweet justice can taste when served ice cold. "We've known about the embezzlement for 6 months, Richard," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "We've been building a case, gathering evidence. Victoria gave us the final pieces this morning." "Victoria?" He almost choked on the name. "You're lying. She wouldn't. She already has." I cut in. "She turned over everything, bank statements, correspondence, recordings of your conversations about the money. She's been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony." The gun in Richard's hand trembled slightly. "That traitorous bitch," he whispered. "She made a deal to save herself," I pointed out. "Just as you would have done in her position. The difference is she got there first." Richard stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. The gun swung carelessly in his agitation. "It doesn't matter. None of it matters. I still have leverage. I still have—" "Nothing," I interrupted softly. "You have nothing, Richard. The company is secure. The real designs are safe. Your accomplices are in custody. Victoria has turned state's evidence. And I glanced at my watch. "Approximately 2 hours. I'll be holding a press conference to announce all of this publicly." He stopped pacing, staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and rage. "You wouldn't dare. You wouldn't expose your own son to public humiliation." "My son," I repeated, an unexpected surge of grief cutting through my composed facade. "My son died the moment he stood in my hospital room and told a nurse not to waste time on me. The man standing before me now is just a criminal holding a gun." Something shifted in Richard's eyes, a flicker of the boy he had once been, quickly swallowed by the hardened man he had become. "You can't do this," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "I already have." I rose from the sofa, surprising myself with my steadiness. "The board voted unanimously this morning to pursue criminal charges. The FBI has been fully briefed. And right now, every exit from this house is being watched by police officers waiting for my signal." As if on cue, my phone buzzed in my handbag. Richard flinched, raising the gun higher. "That's probably Chief Williams," I said calmly, wondering why I haven't checked in. Richard's gaze darted to the windows, where the edges of the curtains admitted thin slices of daylight. He was trapped, and he knew it. "It's over, Richard," I said gently. "Put down the gun.
Turn yourself in.
It will go easier for you if you cooperate now." For a long moment, he just stood there, the gun hanging from his fingers as indecision played across his face. Then slowly, terribly, his expression hardened into resolve. "It's not over," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Not while I have you." Before I could react, he grabbed my arm, yanking me toward him with surprising strength. The gun pressed against my temple, cold and unyielding. "Call them," he ordered, dragging me toward the window. "Tell the police to back off, or I start shooting." Fear surged through me, not of death, strangely, but of failure. I had underestimated Richard's desperation, had believed his greed would give way to self-preservation. I had been wrong. "Richard," I began, trying to keep my voice level. "Think about what you're doing. If you harm me, there's no coming back from that. No deal, no immunity, no second chance." "Shut up," he hissed, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer outside. Just shut up and make the call. My phone buzzed again in my handbag, which now lay on the floor where it had fallen during Richard's sudden movement. I need to get my phone, I said, indicating the bag. Richard hesitated, then nodded.
Slowly. No tricks.
Keeping the gun pressed to my head, he allowed me to bend down and retrieve the handbag. My fingers closed around the phone inside, but also brushed against something else, the small recorder I had placed there before entering the house. Speaker, Richard instructed as I pulled out the phone. And don't try to signal them. I nodded, pressing the answer button and activating the speaker. Eleanor. Marcus's concerned voice filled the room. Are you all right? The police are getting anxious. I'm fine, Marcus, I replied, striving to keep my voice steady. But Richard and I need more time to talk. Please ask the police to move back. He's very insistent about privacy. There was a pause, and I could almost see Marcus's frown. Eleanor, are you sure? Is he? I'm sure, I interrupted, following the script Richard had outlined with his hard stare. Everything is under control. We just need space. Another pause. All right, Marcus said finally. I'll tell them. But Eleanor, if you need help, just say the word tomorrow, and they'll move in immediately. Richard's grip on my arm tightened painfully, a warning not to accept the offered code word. That won't be necessary, I assured Marcus. Richard and I are having a productive conversation. I'll call you when we're finished. After ending the call, I looked up at my son, searching for any sign of the boy I had raised. There was none. What now? I asked quietly. Richard dragged me away from the window, his mind clearly racing. Now we leave. Together. My car is in the garage, fueled and ready. You're going to drive me across the state line. After that, if you behave, maybe I'll let you go. It was a desperate plan, doomed to failure. Every police department in the region would be looking for us. Border crossings would be monitored. Even if we made it out of the house undetected, unlikely with the surveillance in place, we wouldn't get far. But Richard wasn't thinking clearly anymore. Desperation had overwhelmed rational thought. And if I refuse? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The gun pressed harder against my temple. Then neither of us leaves this house alive. A chill ran through me. This was no bluff. The man holding me captive was unraveling, his plans collapsing around him, his options narrowing to the most desperate measures. All right, I said softly. I'll drive you. But first, I need to use the bathroom. Richard frowned, suspicion warring with basic practicality. 3 minutes, he said finally. Leave the door open. Richard, please. Leave it open, he repeated, his tone brooking no argument. Or we leave right now. I nodded, conceding the point. He marched me to the downstairs powder room, positioning himself just outside the door where he could keep the gun trained on me while affording minimal privacy. Inside the small bathroom, I moved on autopilot, my mind racing through options. The window was too small for escape, and there was nothing I could use as a weapon. But there was one thing I could do, one small act of resistance. As I washed my hands, I reached for the hand towel hanging beside the mirror. In doing so, I deliberately knocked over a decorative glass jar filled with potpourri. It shattered on the tile floor with a crash that made Richard jump. What was that? He demanded, stepping partially into the doorway, gun raised. Just an accident, I said, gesturing to the broken glass.
I am sorry.
I'll clean it up. Leave it, he ordered. We don't have time. As I stepped carefully over the glass shards, I let my foot disturb them further, spreading them in a distinctive pattern, an arrow pointing toward the garage. It wasn't much, but it was something, a breadcrumb for the police who would eventually search the house. A tiny act of defiance in the face of my son's betrayal. Move, Richard said, grabbing my arm again and steering me toward the kitchen and the connecting door to the garage. And remember, one wrong move and this is over for both of us. The garage was dim, illuminated only by the small windows set high in the walls. Richard's rental car, a nondescript sedan with out-of-state plates, was parked beside my own vehicle. He pushed me toward the driver's side. Get in, he ordered. Nice and slow. As I opened the car door, A sudden noise from outside the garage made us both freeze, the crunch of gravel under tires, followed by car doors slamming. "Police," a voice called through a megaphone. "Richard Camden, we have the house surrounded. Release Mrs. Camden and come out with your hands up." Richard's face contorted with rage. "You signaled them," he accused, pressing the gun hard against my ribs. "Somehow you signaled them."
No, y insista truthfully.
"I didn't, but they were always watching, Richard. Did you really think they'd just back off on my word alone?" For a moment, indecision flickered across his face. Then his expression hardened into cold resolve. "Get in the car," he repeated. "We're going out the back way." "There is no back way," I pointed out. "The garage only has one door." Richard smiled, a terrible, empty expression that sent chills down my spine. "We're making one." Before I could process his meaning, he aimed the gun at the wall of the garage and fired 3 rapid shots. The explosions in the enclosed space were deafening, leaving my ears ringing. Through the new holes in the wooden siding, I could see my back garden. "Drive through it," Richard commanded, shoving me into the driver's seat and hurrying around to the passenger side. Now, outside, I could hear shouts as the police reacted to the gunshots. They would be moving in, but cautiously, unsure if I had been shot. Richard slid into the passenger seat beside me, the gun never wavering from my direction. "Drive," he repeated. "Or I start shooting at the police next." I turned the key in the ignition, my mind racing. The wall Richard had shot was the weakest part of the garage, old siding that had been scheduled for replacement. The car might indeed break through it, but what then? The garden was enclosed by a stone wall. There was no escape route. Richard seemed to read my thoughts. "The gap between the oak trees," he said. "The wall is lower there. The car can make it." He was right. That section of wall was only about 2 feet high, built more as a decorative border than a barrier. It was possible, just possible, that the car could jump it and reach the alley beyond. I put the car in drive and pressed the accelerator. The engine roared in the enclosed space, the sedan lurching forward toward the bullet-riddled wall. "Faster," Richard urged, bracing himself against the dashboard. I pressed harder, the car picking up speed in the short distance. We hit the wall with a splintering crash, wood giving way around us as the car burst through into the sunlight of the garden. Immediately, I heard shouts and saw officers scrambling to reposition themselves. I swerved toward the gap Richard had indicated, the low stone wall coming up fast. "Hold on," I warned, more out of instinct than concern for Richard's well-being. The car bounced violently as we hit the wall, the undercarriage scraping stone with a horrific noise. For a moment, we teetered, half on and half off the wall. Then gravity took over, and we crashed down on the other side, landing hard in the alley beyond. The impact threw us both forward, my seatbelt cutting into my chest as it restrained me. Richard, who hadn't bothered with his belt in his haste, slammed into the dashboard. The gun flew from his hand, clattering somewhere on the floor of the car. I reacted instantly, slamming on the brakes and throwing the car into park. Richard was momentarily stunned, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where he had struck the windshield. This was my chance, perhaps my only chance. I released my seatbelt and lunged for the door handle, pushing it open even as I heard Richard stirring beside me. "Mother," he snarled, recovering faster than I had expected. His hand shot out, grabbing my hair and yanking me back painfully. I cried out, twisting to break his grip. In the struggle, my elbow connected with his injured head, drawing a howl of pain. His hold loosened just enough for me to wrench free and tumble out of the car onto the rough pavement of the alley. My knees and palms scraped painfully as I scrambled to my feet. Behind me, Richard was fumbling on the floor of the car, searching for the gun. I didn't wait to see if he found it. I ran. The alley opened onto a side street where 2 police cruisers were already screeching to a halt, officers emerging with weapons drawn. I waved frantically, running toward them. "He's in the car," I shouted. "He has a gun." As if to punctuate my warning, a shot rang out from behind me. Something hot and sharp grazed my upper arm, spinning me half around with the impact. I staggered but kept moving forward, driven by pure survival instinct. An officer reached me, pulling me behind the protection of the police car. Another helped me down to a sitting position on the curb, applying pressure to my arm where blood was now staining my sleeve. "Mrs. Camden, are you all right?" the officer asked, her young face tight with concern. "Yes, I managed, though my arm burned and my whole body was beginning to shake with delayed shock." "Just stop him, please." More shots rang out from the alley, Richard firing wildly at the police. They returned fire, the exchange deafeningly loud in the quiet residential street. Then, abruptly, silence fell. "Suspect is down." A voice called over a police radio. "Repeat, suspect is down. Ambulance required." The words penetrated my shock-addled brain slowly. Richard was down.
Shot.
Possibly dead. I should have felt something, relief, perhaps, or grief. Instead, a curious numbness spread through me, as if my emotions had simply shut down in self-defense. "Mrs. Camden?" The officer beside me was speaking again. "The ambulance is on its way. You're going to be fine." I nodded mechanically, my eyes fixed on the alley entrance where several officers were now clustered. One emerged, shaking his head grimly at his colleagues. The message was clear even from a distance. Richard hadn't made it. My son was dead. The emergency room was a blur of activity and noise. My wound, a bullet graze that looked worse than it was, had been cleaned and bandaged. The doctor had offered pain medication, but I had declined. The physical pain was almost welcome, a counterpoint to the emotional numbness that had enveloped me since the shooting. Marcus sat beside my hospital bed, his normally composed face lined with concern. "Eleanor," he said gently, "the police need your statement, but I've told them it can wait until tomorrow if you're not up to it." "No," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "I want to do it now. Get it over with." Before Marcus could respond, the door opened, and Chief Williams entered. He looked exhausted, his uniform rumpled, his expression somber. "Eleanor," he greeted me with a nod. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Jim," I replied automatically. Is it confirmed? About Richard?" The chief's face softened with compassion.
Yes.
"I'm sorry, Eleanor. He didn't make it." The medical examiner puts time of death at 2:17 p.m. The clinical precision of the statement, the exact time my son's life had ended, struck me as both terrible and necessary. There would be no ambiguity, no false hope. Richard was gone. "I need to know what happened," I said, sitting up straighter in the hospital bed. "All of it." Jim exchanged a glance with Marcus, who nodded slightly. "After you escaped from the car," the chief began, "Richard retrieved his weapon. He fired at you once, the shot that grazed your arm, before taking cover inside the vehicle. Officers ordered him repeatedly to drop the weapon and surrender." He paused, choosing his words carefully. Instead, he opened fire on my officers. They returned fire in self-defense. Richard was struck 3 times. The paramedics attempted resuscitation, but his injuries were too severe. I absorbed this information with that same strange detachment. "He chose this," I said finally. From the moment he decided money was more important than family, this path was set. Chief Williams nodded grimly. "The FBI has recovered most of the stolen materials, and Victoria is cooperating fully, providing details of the offshore accounts and Richard's communications with Westridge Industries." "What happens now?" I asked, more to myself than to the men in the room. "Now you rest," Marcus answered firmly. "Everything else can wait." But of course, it couldn't wait. Even as I lay in that hospital bed, events were unfolding that would require my attention. The press was already reporting on the dramatic shootout. The Camden Manufacturing Board was fielding calls from anxious investors. And somewhere, funeral arrangements would need to be made for the son I had lost long before a bullet took his life. The press conference, I remembered suddenly. It was scheduled for 3 p.m. "Cancelled," Marcus assured me. "Under the circumstances, we issued a brief written statement instead. The full story can wait until you're ready." I nodded gratefully. The thought of facing cameras and reporters in my current state was overwhelming. There is one thing that can't wait, Chief Williams said, his tone shifting to something more official. We need your formal statement about what happened in the house before the escape attempt. For the record. So I told them everything. Richard's threats, his plan to sell the company to Westridge, his desperate attempt to use me as a hostage. I described each moment with a clarity that surprised even me, as if the trauma had burned the details into my memory with perfect fidelity. When I finished, the chief nodded, switching off the recorder he had placed beside my bed. Thank you, Eleanor. That matches what we pieced together from the evidence. It's clear that you acted in self-defense throughout the incident. Will there be an investigation? I asked. Into the officers who fired on Richard? Standard procedure, he confirmed. But given the circumstances, an armed suspect who had fired at both a civilian and police officers, I don't anticipate any issues. After the chief left, Marcus remained, his presence a silent comfort in the sterile hospital room. Neither of us spoke for a long time.
What was there to say?
My son had tried to kill me. Now he was dead. Words seemed hopelessly inadequate. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. Davis is 2 floors up. The doctors say he'll make a full recovery. I nodded, grateful for this one piece of good news. I'd like to see him before I leave. Of course. Marcus hesitated, then added, Jennifer has been fielding calls all afternoon. The board wants to know when you'll be returning to the office. The employees are concerned about you. Even some of our clients have reached out. The thought of facing all those people, their sympathy, their curiosity, their judgment, made me suddenly, acutely tired. Tell them I need time, I said. A week, at least. Marcus nodded. Of course. Take as long as you need. The company won't fall apart without you for a few days. But even as he spoke, I knew it wasn't true. Camden Manufacturing needed steady leadership now more than ever. The attempted theft of our designs, the public spectacle of Richard's crimes and death, the potential damage to our reputation, all would require careful management in the coming days and weeks. And despite my exhaustion, despite my grief, I knew I would be the one to provide that leadership. I had not built this company to see it falter now, even in the face of personal tragedy. 3 days, I amended. I'll be back in the office in 3 days. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. He knew me too well to waste his breath. 3 days, he agreed. Not a moment sooner. When he left, I was finally alone with my thoughts. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of the monitoring equipment and the distant sounds of the medical staff in the corridor outside. I closed my eyes, expecting tears to come at last. But they didn't. Perhaps I had cried all my tears for Richard years ago, when I first began to suspect the darkness growing in him. Or perhaps the shock was still too fresh, the wound too raw for tears to breach the numbness. Whatever the reason, I lay dry-eyed in that hospital bed, my mind drifting not to memories of Richard, but to Robert. What would he have thought of all this? Would he have seen it coming? Could he have prevented it? The questions had no answers, and eventually, exhaustion claimed me, pulling me into a mercifully dreamless sleep. The funeral was a small, private affair, held 3 days after the shooting. Despite the public nature of Richard's crimes and death, I had insisted on dignity in his final arrangements. No press was allowed at the cemetery. No photographs. Just a handful of people, myself, Marcus and Jennifer, a few longtime family friends who had known Richard since childhood, and, surprisingly, Victoria. She had come to the hospital the day after the shooting, her face pale and drawn. I know I have no right to be here, she had said, twisting her hands nervously. But I needed to tell you how sorry I am. For everything. I had studied her face, searching for insincerity and finding none. Did you love him? I asked. Ever? Her eyes had filled with tears. At the beginning, yes. Very much. But he changed, or maybe I just started seeing who he really was. Either way, by the end, I didn't recognize him anymore. I had nodded, understanding all too well. Will you come to the funeral? The question had surprised her. You would allow that? You were his wife, I said simply. Whatever else happened, that means something. So she stood with us now, a slender figure in black, as the minister spoke words of comfort that seemed to bounce off the hard shell of my grief without penetrating. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, the familiar phrases washed over me. The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. I watched as the polished mahogany casket was lowered into the earth, feeling strangely disconnected from the scene, as if I were observing someone else's tragedy. The son I had loved, the child who had once climbed trees in our yard, who had laughed with unrestrained joy, who had once looked at me with trust and affection, that boy was long gone. This funeral was merely the final acknowledgement of a loss I had been experiencing in slow motion for years. After the service, we gathered at my home for a small reception. The house had been cleaned of all evidence of the confrontation, the broken garage wall repaired, the glass shards swept away, the bullet holes in the siding patched and painted. But I could still feel the echoes of violence in those rooms, a lingering tension that no amount of physical restoration could erase. Victoria approached me as I stood alone by the window, watching the afternoon light fade over the garden. "Mrs. Camden," she began hesitantly, "I wanted to let you know I'm leaving town, starting fresh somewhere new." I turned to her, noting the absence of the flashy jewelry she had once favored. Without the ostentatious displays of wealth, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "Where will you go?" I asked. She shrugged. "West, probably. Seattle or Portland. Somewhere with rain and coffee shops and no memories." I nodded, understanding the desire to escape the weight of the past. "The authorities? They're satisfied with your cooperation?" "Yes," she confirmed. "Full immunity in exchange for my testimony against Westridge. The case is solid, especially with the evidence from Richard's computer. They'll be facing federal charges for corporate espionage and attempted fraud." "Good," I said, surprising myself with the vehemence of the word. Justice for Westridge wouldn't bring Richard back or erase his crimes, but it would protect the company and its employees from future predators. Victoria hesitated, then pulled a small box from her purse. "I wanted to return this," she said, opening it to reveal the diamond necklace I had given her last Christmas. "It doesn't feel right to keep it." I studied the necklace, remembering how pleased I had been to select it, how I had imagined it becoming a family heirloom, perhaps someday adorning the neck of a granddaughter at her wedding. Such foolish dreams, in retrospect. "Keep it," I said finally. "Sell it if you need the money. Or save it as a reminder that not everything in this chapter of your life was darkness." Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't deserve your kindness." "Perhaps not," I acknowledged. "But kindness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to be the person you want to be, regardless of what others have done." It was a lesson I was still learning myself, that I could choose grace even in the face of betrayal, that I could honor the memory of the boy Richard had been without excusing the man he had become. After the last guests had departed, I walked through the quiet house, extinguishing lights and straightening cushions. In Richard's old bedroom, now a guest room, I paused. The baseball trophies still stood on the shelf. The Harvard diploma still hung on the wall. But now these artifacts felt like relics from a stranger's life, disconnected from the man who had died with hatred in his heart and a gun in his hand. I took down the diploma, removed the trophies from the shelf, and placed them all in a box. Perhaps someday I would want these memories back, would find comfort in the tangible reminders of happier times. But not now. Now they were just painful reminders of potential squandered, of love betrayed. The next morning, I returned to Camden Manufacturing for the first time since Richard's break-in. The employees lined the halls as I walked to my office, their faces a mixture of sympathy and respect. No one spoke. What words could possibly address what had happened? But their presence was a silent affirmation of support. In my office, I found a vase of fresh flowers on my desk, with a simple card signed by every member of the executive team. "Welcome back, Eleanor. We stand with you." The gesture, small but sincere, broke through the numbness I had been carrying since the shooting. For the first time since Richard's death, I wept, not just for my son, but for everything that had been lost and everything that remained. When the tears finally subsided, I straightened my shoulders, wiped my eyes, and called for Jennifer to bring in the day's agenda. There was work to be done, a company to protect, employees who depended on steady leadership. I could not change the past, but I could still shape the future. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to my life. Days at the office, focusing on rebuilding trust with clients and investors. Evenings at home, gradually reclaiming my space from the shadows of violence and betrayal. Regular calls with Marcus and Jennifer, who had become more friends than employees. Weekly dinners with Harold Winston and his wife, who treated me with the gentle consideration one might show a survivor of a natural disaster. 1 month after the funeral, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Davis, fully recovered from his gunshot wound, appeared at my door in a crisp suit rather than his security uniform. "Mrs. Camden," he greeted me, standing almost at attention. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I assured him, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. It's good to see you looking so well." He sat, his posture still military straight. "I wanted to thank you personally for the medical coverage and the paid leave. It was more than generous." "It was the least I could do," I said sincerely. "You were injured protecting this company." "Protecting me?" Davis nodded, a slight flush coloring his cheeks at the praise. "That's actually why I'm here. I'm returning to active duty next week, and I wanted to discuss security protocols moving forward." I raised an eyebrow. "Shouldn't you be having this conversation with our head of security?" "Normally, yes," he agreed. "But in this case, I thought it best to speak with you directly. You see, during my recovery, I've been reviewing our entire security system. There are vulnerabilities that I believe need to be addressed immediately." His tone was professional, but I could hear the underlying concern. "What sort of vulnerabilities?" Davis leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Mrs. Camden, what happened with Richard was a worst-case scenario, but it exposed weaknesses in our physical and digital security that could be exploited by others. Industrial espionage didn't die with your son." The blunt assessment was oddly refreshing after weeks of people tiptoeing around Richard's crimes.
What do you propose?
For the next hour, Davis outlined a comprehensive security overhaul, everything from upgraded surveillance systems to new protocols for access to sensitive areas to enhance cybersecurity measures. "It's extensive," he concluded, "and expensive. But in my professional opinion, it's necessary to protect Camden Manufacturing from future threats." I studied him thoughtfully. His presentation had been thorough, his reasoning sound. More importantly, he had demonstrated a level of commitment to the company that went far beyond his job description. "How would you feel about implementing these changes yourself?" I asked. "As our new director of security?" Davis blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Ma'am, our current security director is retiring next month," I explained. "We've been quietly searching for a replacement. Based on what I've seen today, I think you'd be an excellent candidate." I'm honored," he stammered, "but I don't have the executive experience." "You have something more valuable," I interrupted. "Loyalty, integrity, and first-hand knowledge of what happens when security fails." He fell silent, considering the offer. "I would need to build a team," he said finally. "Bring in specialists for the cybersecurity aspects. You'll have the budget," I assured him. "And my full support." Davis straightened in his chair, a new resolve in his bearing. "Then I accept, Mrs. Camden. And I promise you, what happened with Richard will never happen again on my watch." The conviction in his voice was exactly what I needed to hear, a promise that from the ashes of betrayal, something stronger could be built. After Davis left, I stood at my office window, looking out over the manufacturing campus. The afternoon shift was changing, employees streaming between buildings in the autumn sunshine. Their lives continued, untouched by the personal tragedy that had nearly destroyed the company they depended on. My phone rang, Jennifer, reminding me of the board meeting scheduled for 3 p.m. I acknowledged the reminder, then returned to my contemplation of the scene below. For 50 years, I had built this company alongside Robert, believing we were creating a legacy for our son. Now that son was gone, his betrayal still a raw wound in my heart. But the legacy remained. Not in the form I had envisioned, but in the job secured, the innovation fostered, the community supported. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps it had always been enough. As I turned from the window to prepare for the board meeting, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For an instant, my heart raced with irrational fear. Richard, reaching from beyond the grave with one final threat. But when I opened the message, it was something entirely different. Mrs. Camden, this is Sandra Bell from Memorial Hospital. I was your nurse during your stay in the ICU 2 months ago. I hope you don't mind me contacting you personally, but I wanted to check how you're doing after everything that's happened. Many of us at the hospital have been thinking of you. The simple kindness of the message, from a woman who had cared for me when I was at my most vulnerable, who had witnessed firsthand Richard's casual cruelty, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I typed a reply, thanking her for her concern and assuring her I was recovering well. Then, on impulse, I added an invitation for her to join me for tea sometime. After all that had happened, perhaps it was time to expand my circle beyond the business associates who had become my surrogate family. As I sent the message, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying seemed to lift slightly. Life would go on, different than before, marked by loss and betrayal, but also by the possibility of new connections, new purpose. The intercom buzzed. The board members were arriving for the meeting. I gathered my papers, straightened my jacket, and moved toward the door. There was work to be done, decisions to be made. The past could not be changed, but the future was still mine to shape. And for the first time since Richard's betrayal, that future didn't seem entirely bleak. 3 months after Richard's death, I stood in the cavernous main hall of the Camden manufacturing plant, surrounded by employees and their families. The annual holiday party was a tradition dating back to the company's earliest days, a chance to celebrate the year's achievements and look forward to the next. This year, the celebration was particularly meaningful. Despite the corporate espionage attempt, despite the public scandal of Richard's crimes and death, Camden Manufacturing had not just survived but thrived. The security overhaul Davis had implemented had restored confidence among clients. The new precision valve system, the very one Richard had tried to steal, had successfully launched to industry acclaim. And just last week, we had broken ground on an expansion that would create 50 new jobs in the coming year. As I moved through the crowd, accepting good wishes and exchanging pleasantries, I was struck by how normal it felt. The initial awkwardness that had followed my return to the office had faded. People no longer looked at me with that uncomfortable mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I was no longer the woman whose son had tried to kill her, but simply Mrs. Camden, the CEO, the founder, the steady hand guiding the company forward. If you're watching this story unfold, subscribe and comment if you've ever had to rebuild your life after losing someone you loved, even if that loss happened while they were still alive. Mrs. Camden. A voice called from behind me. I turned to find Marcus approaching, champagne flute in hand. The board members would like a word when you have a moment. Nothing urgent, he added, seeing my expression. Just year-end pleasantries. I nodded, about to follow him to where the board had gathered near the enormous Christmas tree, when a commotion at the entrance caught my attention. 2 police officers in uniform had entered the hall, their serious expressions instantly recognizable amidst the festive atmosphere. Chief Williams was with them, scanning the crowd until his eyes found mine. The grim set of his mouth sent a chill through me despite the warmth of the crowded room. Jim. I greeted him as he approached, trying to keep my voice light for the benefit of those around us. I didn't expect to see you here tonight. Is everything all right? The chief glanced at Marcus, then back to me. Eleanor, could we speak privately? My stomach tightened with apprehension. Of course. We can use my office. I led the way through the party, aware of curious eyes following our progress. My office was in a separate building, connected to the main hall by a glass-enclosed walkway. The contrast between the noisy celebration we left behind and the quiet of my office was jarring. What's happened, Jim? I asked as soon as the door closed behind us. You're scaring me. The chief looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I'm sorry to intrude on your event, Eleanor, but something's come up that couldn't wait. What is it? I pressed, my mind racing through possibilities. Had there been a security breach? Another attempt at corporate espionage? Some new scandal related to Richard's crimes? Williams took a deep breath. We've received a credible threat against you. An anonymous tip came in this afternoon warning that someone intends to harm you at tonight's event. The words seemed to hang in the air between us, too ominous to fully absorb. A threat? From whom? We don't know, he admitted. The call was untraceable. But the caller knew details about tonight's party that weren't public knowledge. The timing, the location, the fact that you would be giving a speech. We have to take it seriously. My thoughts immediately went to Victoria, the only person with a potential motive who might still have insider information about company events. But she had moved across the country months ago, starting a new life far from the shadows of the past. Do you think it's related to Richard? I asked. Someone from Westridge seeking revenge for the failed deal? Williams shrugged. It's possible. The Westridge executives are facing serious charges thanks to your testimony. They've lost millions in stock value and legal fees. That kind of blow creates enemies. I sank into my desk chair, suddenly weary. Would Richard's betrayal never stop rippling through my life, disturbing the peace I had worked so hard to rebuild? What do you recommend? I asked, practicality asserting itself through the shock. We've already stationed officers at all entrances, Williams explained. And I'd like to put a plainclothes detail on you for the duration of the event. But honestly, Eleanor, the safest option would be to cut the evening short. Send everyone home. We can reschedule when we've had time to investigate the threat more thoroughly. I shook my head immediately.
No.
I won't disrupt the holiday party. These people have worked hard all year. They deserve their celebration. I straightened in my chair. Decision made. Your officers can stay, of course. But the party continues. Williams looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. At least let us move your speech to a more secure location. The main hall has too many entry points, too many windows. This was a reasonable compromise. The production floor, I suggested. One way in, no windows. We were planning to give tours later anyway. The chief nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. That works. I'll coordinate with your security team. As Williams left to make arrangements, Marcus entered, his face tight with concern. Eleanor, what's going on? People are starting to notice something's wrong. I filled him in quickly. His reaction was predictable. Cancel the event, he urged. It's not worth the risk. And give whoever made the threat exactly what they want. I countered.
No.
We're proceeding as planned, just with additional security and a change of venue for my remarks. Marcus knew me well enough to recognize when my mind was made up. At least let me stay with you, he said. An extra pair of eyes. I agreed, touched by his concern. Together, we returned to the party, doing our best to project normalcy despite the police presence that had now been augmented by several plainclothes officers strategically positioned throughout the hall. For the next hour, I mingled and chatted as if nothing were amiss, though my senses were on high alert, scanning each face, each interaction for signs of threat. Davis shadowed me discreetly, his security training evident in the way his eyes constantly swept the room, missing nothing. When it came time for my speech, Williams himself escorted me to the production floor, where employees had already begun to gather. The massive space, normally filled with the sounds of machinery and activity, now held the murmur of hundreds of conversations and the soft strains of holiday music played through speakers set up for the occasion. I took my place on the small platform that had been erected at one end of the floor. From this vantage point, I could see the entire gathering, families in their holiday best, children darting between groups of adults, longtime employees introducing newer hires to company traditions. Despite the threat hanging over the evening, a wave of fierce protectiveness washed over me. These people were more than employees. They were the living embodiment of what Robert and I had built. I would not allow fear to overshadow their celebration. As I stepped to the microphone, the crowd quieted, faces turning expectantly toward me. I had prepared a standard year-end address, congratulations on achievements, gratitude for hard work, optimism for the future. But standing there, Aware of the police officers positioned at every entrance, I found myself setting aside my notes. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady despite the tension I felt. "As I look out at all of you tonight, I'm reminded of something my husband used to say. A company isn't buildings or machines or patents. It's people, joined in common purpose." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Many of them had worked alongside Robert, had mourned his passing, had helped keep his vision alive in the years since. This year has tested that common purpose in ways none of us could have anticipated. I continued, acknowledging without directly mentioning the scandal that had touched us all. We've faced challenges both public and private. We've weathered storms that might have broken a lesser company. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some I had known for decades, others newer but no less valued. But we've done more than survive. We've thrived. The Camden valve system is revolutionizing the industry. Our employee retention rate is the highest it's been in 15 years. And our community outreach programs have touched more lives than ever before. Pride swelled in my chest, momentarily displacing the anxiety of the threat. Whatever darkness lurked on the periphery of this evening, it could not diminish what we had accomplished together. As we look to the new year, I continued, I want each of you to know how deeply I value your commitment, your integrity, A sudden movement at the back of the crowd caught my eye, someone pushing forward aggressively, ignoring the protests of those jostled aside. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the face. Victoria. She looked nothing like the polished socialite who had stood beside Richard at the will reading, nor the broken woman who had attended his funeral. This Victoria was wild-eyed, her hair disheveled, her expression a mask of barely contained fury. "Security," I said into the microphone, my voice remarkably calm given the adrenaline surging through me. "We have an uninvited guest." Davis was already moving, as were several police officers. But Victoria was faster, darting through the crowd with the desperation of someone with nothing left to lose. "You ruined everything," she screamed, her voice carrying over the startled murmurs of the crowd. "He would still be alive if not for you." I stepped back from the microphone, scanning for any sign that she was armed. Williams materialized at my side, positioning himself protectively in front of me. "Victoria Camden," he called out, his voice commanding. "Stop where you are and put your hands where I can see them." To everyone's surprise, she complied, freezing in place just 20 feet from the platform. Her hands rose slowly, empty but trembling with emotion. "I just want her to hear the truth," Victoria said, tears now streaming down her face. "I want everyone to hear it." Williams gestured for his officers to hold their positions, but not to approach yet. "What truth is that, Mrs. Camden?" Victoria's gaze locked on me, her eyes burning with a mixture of grief and accusation. That she drove him to it. That she never gave him the chance he deserved. That her precious company was always more important than her own son. The words struck me like physical blows, resurrecting doubts I had struggled to bury in the months since Richard's death. Had I failed him as a mother? Had my focus on the business deprived him of something essential? But as quickly as the doubts arose, I pushed them aside. Richard's choices had been his own. His resentment, his greed, his willingness to destroy what others had built. Those were not the products of my neglect, but of his own character. "Victoria," I said, stepping forward to stand beside Williams. "I thought you were in Seattle, starting over." "I tried," she said, her voice breaking. "God knows I tried. But I couldn't leave it like this. Couldn't let you just win." "This isn't about winning," I replied, keeping my voice gentle despite the audience of hundreds hanging on every word. "Richard made his choices. So, did you? And now we all have to live with the consequences." Victoria laughed, a harsh, broken sound that echoed in the cavernous space. "Consequences? You're standing there celebrating while he's in the ground. How is that fair?" A murmur ran through the crowd, discomfort, disapproval, perhaps even a measure of sympathy for this clearly broken woman. "Life isn't fair, Victoria," I said, the simple truth of it resonating in my chest. If it were, Richard would have valued family over money. He would have built something of his own instead of trying to steal what others had created. He would have loved you better. The last words landed like a physical blow. Victoria's shoulders slumped, her rage seemingly deflating before our eyes. "He never loved me," she whispered, the admission barely audible. "Not really. I was just useful." Davis had reached her now, gently taking her arm. She didn't resist as he began to lead her toward the exit where police officers waited. But as they passed the edge of the platform, she stopped, looking up at me with eyes that had cleared somewhat, as if the fog of rage had temporarily lifted. "I made the threat," she confessed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I wanted to scare you, to ruin your precious party. I thought it would make me feel better." A bitter smile twisted her lips. It didn't. As Davis and the officers escorted her away, a stunned silence fell over the gathering. Hundreds of eyes turned to me, waiting to see how I would respond to this public display of our family's most private pain. For a moment, I considered ending the event, sending everyone home to salvage what was left of the evening. But that would be conceding victory to Victoria's desperate act, allowing one more ripple of Richard's betrayal to disrupt the lives he had already damaged. Instead, I returned to the microphone. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, my voice steady. "As some of you may have gathered, that was my former daughter-in-law, who is clearly still struggling with my son's death." A sympathetic murmur ran through the crowd. I mention this not to embarrass her, but to acknowledge something we sometimes forget in our professional lives, that we are all human, all vulnerable to loss and grief and anger, and that healing takes different paths for different people. I paused, gathering my thoughts. What had begun as a standard corporate address had become something much more personal, more raw. But perhaps that was fitting. Perhaps that was what this company, these people, needed from me now, not just leadership, but humanity. When my husband and I founded Camden Manufacturing 58 years ago, we had a simple mission: to build something that would outlast us, that would provide not just products but livelihoods, community, purpose. Despite everything that has happened this year, that mission remains unchanged. I looked out at the sea of faces, concerned, attentive, loyal. So tonight, as we celebrate another year of achievement, I ask you to join me in recommitting to that original vision. A company of people joined in common purpose, building something worthy of outlasting us all. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then swelled until it filled the vast production floor. I stood there, absorbing the sound, drawing strength from it. This, I realized, was my true legacy, not the son who had rejected everything I valued, but this community of people who shared and advanced the vision Robert and I had created. As the evening continued, many approached me with words of support or simply a reassuring touch on the arm. No one mentioned Victoria or Richard directly, but the undercurrent of protective concern was unmistakable. These people, employees, board members, community partners, had witnessed my most painful family wound exposed in public, and they had responded not with judgment but with compassion. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Chief Williams approached me again. "Victoria is in custody," he reported. "She's being charged with making terroristic threats, but her lawyer is already talking about a mental health defense. Given her state tonight, it might stick." I nodded, unsurprised. "Will she go to prison?" Williams shrugged. "Hard to say. No actual weapon was found, and she didn't physically assault anyone. With a good lawyer and a sympathetic judge, she might get off with mandatory treatment and probation." A part of me wanted justice, wanted Victoria to face serious consequences for the fear she had caused, the event she had disrupted. But a larger part recognized that more punishment wouldn't heal whatever was broken in her. "I won't push for maximum charges," I decided. "She needs help more than punishment." Williams nodded, respect evident in his expression. "That's generous of you, Eleanor. Not everyone would be so forgiving in your position." "It's not forgiveness," I clarified. "Just perspective. Victoria lost everything too. Her husband, her future, her identity as Richard's wife. She's paying for her choices every day, just like the rest of us." After the chief left, Marcus found me gathering my things in my office, preparing to head home after the tumultuous evening. "That was quite a speech," he commented, leaning against the doorframe. "Especially the improvised parts." I smiled tiredly. Not exactly what I had planned for the evening. "No," he agreed. "But maybe exactly what everyone needed to hear." He paused, studying me with the perceptiveness of long friendship. "How are you really? After everything with Victoria?" The question gave me pause.
How was I?
The shock of seeing Victoria had faded, leaving behind a complex tangle of emotions: sadness for what she had become, anger at her disruption of the event, and, surprisingly, a measure of relief. The confrontation I had been unconsciously bracing for since Richard's death had finally occurred. The last loose end of that terrible chapter had been addressed, however messily. "I'm okay," I said finally. Better than I would have expected, actually. Marcus nodded, accepting this assessment. "Jennifer and I can drive you home if you'd like." Given the excitement, it might be best not to be alone tonight. The offer was tempting. The thought of returning to my empty house, with all its memories and ghosts, held little appeal after the emotional drainage of the evening. But I also recognized that I needed space to process what had happened, to sit with my thoughts and feelings without an audience, however well-intentioned. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "But I think I need some solitude tonight." Rain check. Marcus looked like he wanted to insist, but respected my decision. "Of course. But call if you change your mind. Anytime, Eleanor."
I mean that.
The drive home was quiet, the streets largely empty this late on a December evening. Christmas lights twinkled from houses and storefronts, their cheerful glow at odds with my pensive mood. Victoria's accusation echoed in my mind. She drove him to it. Her precious company was always more important than her own son. Was there truth in that? Had I prioritized Camden manufacturing over Richard in ways that had shaped his resentment? The question had haunted me since his death, emerging in quiet moments to challenge the narrative I had constructed about his betrayal. But tonight, for the first time, I found myself considering a different perspective. Perhaps the company hadn't been a rival for my attention, but a template for the values I had tried to instill in my son: hard work, integrity, commitment to something larger than oneself. Values that, for reasons I might never fully understand, Richard had ultimately rejected. The realization didn't absolve me of all parental mistakes. No mother is perfect. But it lifted some of the specific guilt I had been carrying, the fear that my dedication to the business had somehow created the man Richard became. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a car parked across the street, one of Williams's officers, no doubt, assigned to keep watch after Victoria's threat. The knowledge that I was being protected should have been reassuring. Instead, it highlighted how profoundly my life had changed in the past few months. From respected business leader to potential victim. From mother to whatever I was now. A woman who had outlived the future she had planned, forced to create a new one from the wreckage of betrayal. Inside, the house was dark and silent. I moved through the rooms, turning on lamps, restoring warmth and light to spaces that too often felt empty now. In the kitchen, I made tea, a small ritual of comfort, and carried it to Robert's study, the room where I still felt closest to him. The leather-bound journal I had consulted on the night of Richard's threat was still in the desk drawer with the false bottom. I took it out now, running my fingers over the worn cover. Robert had seen the darkness growing in our son long before I had been willing to acknowledge it, had tried to warn me, to prepare me for the betrayal he sensed was coming. "You were right," I said aloud to the empty room, to the husband who had been gone for 5 years, but whose presence I still felt in quiet moments. About Richard. About everything. Sitting in Robert's chair, surrounded by his books and the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco, I allowed myself to imagine what he might say if he were here now. Not platitudes or easy comfort, but the clear-eyed wisdom that had balanced my sometimes excessive optimism throughout our marriage. He would acknowledge the pain, I thought. The grief not just for Richard's death, but for the son we had thought we knew. The humiliation of having our family's darkest moments exposed at the holiday party. the lingering anxiety that would likely follow me for months or years to come. But he would also remind me of what remained. The company, stronger than ever despite Richard's attempt to destroy it. The employees who had rallied around me tonight, offering silent support in the face of Victoria's accusations. The future that still stretched before me, different than I had imagined, but still full of possibility. Most importantly, he would remind me that grief, like healing, is not linear. That some days would be harder than others. That moving forward didn't mean forgetting or even fully forgiving, but simply continuing to live with purpose and integrity. As I sat there, cradling my tea and surrounded by Robert's things, I felt a subtle shift within me, not a dramatic revelation or sudden peace, but a small, solid step toward acceptance.
Richard was gone.
Victoria would face whatever consequences the legal system deemed appropriate. And I would continue building the legacy that had always been about more than just passing a business to the next generation. The realization was both sobering and liberating. The future I had planned was irrevocably lost, but the one stretching before me was entirely mine to shape. Without Richard's looming expectations, without the pressure to groom an heir, without the blinders of maternal hope that had kept me from seeing who my son truly was. I closed Robert's journal and returned it to its hiding place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, questions about Victoria's outburst, concerns from the board, perhaps even renewed media interest in the Camden family scandal. But tonight, in the quiet of this study, I had found if not peace then at least perspective. As I prepared for bed, my phone rang. An unusual occurrence this late. The screen showed Marcus's number. "Eleanor," he said when I answered, his voice tense. "I just got a call from Jennifer. The FBI raided Westridge Industries tonight, right after our party ended." I sat down on the edge of my bed, suddenly alert.
Why?
What did they find? Evidence that Victoria wasn't acting alone tonight, Marcus explained. Apparently, she's been in contact with Westridge executives for weeks. They funded her return from Seattle, encouraged her to disrupt the holiday party. But that's not all. "Go on," I prompted, a chill running through me. The FBI found communications suggesting Westridge was planning something much bigger than Victoria's outburst. Something that would have permanently damaged Camden Manufacturing's reputation and stock value. What kind of something? I asked, though a part of me didn't want to know, didn't want to face yet another threat from the shadows of Richard's betrayal. Marcus hesitated. A coordinated disinformation campaign. False allegations of product defects that would have triggered recalls, regulatory investigations, lawsuits. They were going to launch it in January, time to coincide with our biggest product delivery of the year. The calculated malice of the plan took my breath away. This wasn't just business competition, it was attempted destruction, a corporate version of salting the earth. How did the FBI find out? I asked. That's the strange part, Marcus admitted. They received an anonymous tip last week, with detailed information about where to find the evidence. The timing of tonight's raid wasn't coincidental. They wanted to catch Westridge off guard, right after they thought Victoria had successfully disrupted our event. An anonymous tip. Just like the warning about Victoria's threat that had brought Chief Williams to the holiday party. The parallels seemed too neat to be coincidence. Do they know who sent the tip? I asked, already suspecting the answer. No, Marcus confirmed. But whoever it was had insider knowledge of both Westridge's plans and Victoria's involvement. The FBI is still investigating, but they wanted us to know that the immediate threat has been neutralized. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, turning this new information over in my mind. Who would have both the knowledge of Westridge's plans and the motivation to expose them? A disgruntled employee? A competitor with their own agenda? Or someone closer to the situation, someone with a personal stake in protecting Camden Manufacturing? The thought that formed in my mind seemed impossible, yet somehow fitting.
Victoria herself.
Perhaps her confrontation at the holiday party had been only half the story, a public display of grief and accusation that masked a more complex truth. Perhaps in coming back, in facing me, she had also been executing her own form of justice against those who had used Richard's greed and resentment for their own purposes. It was just a theory, unprovable without Victoria's confirmation. but it offered a symmetry that appealed to my sense of narrative. The woman who had once helped Richard betray me now betraying those who had sought to finish what he started. Whether my theory was correct or not, the result was the same. Camden Manufacturing was safe. The last threat emanating from Richard's actions had been neutralized, and I had been given something unexpected in the aftermath of so much betrayal, the chance to truly start fresh, without looking over my shoulder for the next attack. As I finally drifted toward sleep, I found myself thinking not of Richard or Victoria or Westridge Industries, but of the faces I had seen at the holiday party. The employees who had applauded my impromptu speech. The board members who had rallied around me. The community that had weathered the storm of scandal and emerged intact. They were my legacy now. Not the son I had lost, but the extended family I had found in the company Robert and I had built together. And for tonight, at least, that knowledge was enough to bring me peace. 6 months after the holiday party incident, I stood on the stage of the Grand Ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton, accepting the Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Association of Manufacturers. The audience, a who's who of industry leaders, politicians, and community figures, applauded as I approached the podium. The journey to this moment had been long and often painful. The weeks following Victoria's outburst and the Westridge raid had brought renewed media scrutiny, uncomfortable questions, and a fresh wave of gossip about the Camden family tragedy. But they had also brought resolution. Westridge executives were facing federal charges. Victoria had entered a residential treatment program as part of a plea agreement. And Camden Manufacturing had not just survived the attempted sabotage, but thrived in its aftermath. "Thank you," I began, looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar, many not. This recognition is deeply meaningful, not just to me personally, but to the hundreds of people who make Camden Manufacturing what it is today. The speech I had prepared traced the company's growth from a small factory with 12 employees to the industry leader it had become. It acknowledged challenges overcome, innovations pioneered, communities supported. It mentioned Robert's vision and my stewardship of that vision after his death. What it didn't mention was Richard. Not his betrayal, not his death, not even his existence. This omission had been deliberate, a choice to focus on what had been built rather than what had been lost. But standing at the podium, feeling the weight of the Crystal Award in my hands, I found myself deviating from my prepared remarks. Many of you know that the past year has brought personal challenges alongside professional triumphs, I said, my voice steady despite the unexpected direction. My family has been the subject of headlines and gossip. My private pain has become public property. And through it all, I've learned something profound about legacy. The room had gone very quiet, the audience leaning in to catch every word of what they sensed was a rare moment of public vulnerability from a woman known for her composure. Legacy isn't what we leave to our children, I continued. It's what we leave in our children. The values we instill, the examples we set, the lessons we teach about integrity, responsibility, and purpose. I paused, aware of the weight of what I was about to say. By that measure, I failed with my son. Despite every advantage, despite all the love and opportunity my husband and I provided, Richard chose a path of destruction. He valued money over family, power over integrity, immediate gratification over lasting impact. A murmur ran through the audience, surprise at my candor, perhaps, or discomfort at the breach of social convention that dictated family tragedies be kept private. I share this not to gain sympathy or to speak ill of the dead, but because Richard's choices taught me something vital about leadership. About the difference between simply passing on a title or a company or a fortune and truly transmitting the values that make those things meaningful. I looked out at the crowd, meeting the eyes of fellow business leaders who had children of their own, who faced the same challenge of balancing professional success with family responsibility. The true measure of our legacy isn't in what we build, but in who we inspire. Not in the wealth we accumulate, but in the values we demonstrate. Not in the power we wield, but in how we use that power to elevate others. The silence in the ballroom was absolute now, hundreds of people holding their breath as I approached the heart of what I needed to say. Camden Manufacturing survived my son's betrayal because it was built on something stronger than one person's greed. It was built on a foundation of shared purpose, mutual respect, and genuine community. Those values sustained us through crisis and will carry us forward into the future. I lifted the Crystal Award slightly. So I accept this recognition not just for myself or for my late husband, but for everyone who has contributed to making Camden Manufacturing a company worthy of outlasting its founders. And I pledge to use whatever time I have left to ensure that the values we built into this company will endure long after I'm gone. The applause that followed was thunderous, the audience rising to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to go on and on. I stood there, receiving their acknowledgement not just of my professional achievements, but of the personal courage it had taken to transform tragedy into wisdom, betrayal into renewed purpose. Later, at the reception following the ceremony, I found myself approached by a steady stream of well-wishers. Some offered congratulations on the award. Others, more tentatively, expressed admiration for my candor about Richard. But it was a conversation with a young woman, the daughter of a long-time industry colleague, that stayed with me long after the evening ended. "Mrs. Camden," she said, her expression earnest beneath fashionable glasses, "I'm Amanda Winters. My father runs Winters Precision Tools." I nodded, recognizing the name. George Winters had been a friendly competitor and occasional collaborator for decades. "He couldn't be here tonight," Amanda continued. "Heart surgery last month. But he wanted me to come in his place because I'm taking over the company next quarter. And he thought I could learn something from you." The statement was offered without pretense or flattery, a simple acknowledgement of mentorship sought. "What would you like to know?" I asked, genuinely curious about what wisdom this clearly intelligent young woman hoped to glean. Amanda hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "How do you rebuild after betrayal? Not just personally, but organizationally. How do you restore trust when it's been so fundamentally broken?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. Most people danced around the subject of Richard's betrayal, if they mentioned it at all. But this young woman, poised on the threshold of her own leadership journey, had cut straight to the heart of what I had learned in the past year. "Transparency," I said after a moment's reflection. "Complete, sometimes painful honesty about what happened and why, followed by concrete action to address the vulnerabilities that allowed the betrayal to occur." Amanda nodded, clearly taking mental notes. "And personally, how did you find the strength to keep going when it would have been easier to just retire? Disappear from public view?" I considered the question, wanting to offer something more substantial than platitudes about resilience or determination. "I think about Robert," I said finally, "about the promises we made to each other and to the people who depend on Camden Manufacturing. And I ask myself what kind of legacy I want to leave, not just as a businesswoman, but as a human being." Something in my answer seemed to resonate with Amanda. She straightened slightly, a new resolve evident in her posture. "My father always said you were the most principled person in the industry. Now I see why." After she moved on, I found myself reflecting on our conversation. What kind of legacy did I want to leave? Not the one I had planned for decades, a family business passed down through generations of Camdens. That dream had died with Richard. But perhaps something equally meaningful was taking shape in its place. Marcus appeared at my elbow, champagne flute in hand. "Quite a speech," he commented. "Not the one we rehearsed." I smiled, accepting the glass he offered. Sometimes the prepared remarks don't say what needs to be said. "Well, it landed," he assured me. "I've had 3 different industry publications ask for interviews already. They're calling it your Phoenix moment, rising from the ashes of personal tragedy to redefine legacy in business." The description made me uncomfortable, smacking too much of turning family trauma into a branding opportunity. But I understood the impulse to find meaning in suffering, to extract wisdom from pain. Wasn't that exactly what I had been trying to do since Richard's betrayal and death? No interviews, I decided. What I said tonight was enough. Let's keep the focus on the company's achievements, not my personal story. Marcus nodded, respecting my wishes as always. Speaking of the company, The board has been discussing succession planning. Now might be a good time to start thinking about your eventual retirement. The suggestion wasn't unexpected. At 79, I was well past the age when most executives step down. The events of the past year had demonstrated both my resilience and the vulnerability of having a single individual so central to the company's leadership. I'm not ready to leave yet, I said. But you're right. We should start planning. Do you have candidates in mind? Marcus hesitated. The board has some ideas. But before we get into names, they wanted me to ask about your own preference. Specifically about Jennifer. The suggestion surprised me. Jennifer had been with the company for nearly 15 years, rising from staff attorney to general counsel to her current role as my chief of staff. She was brilliant, dedicated, and intimately familiar with every aspect of Camden manufacturing. But she wasn't even from a business background originally. Jennifer, I repeated, considering the possibility. She's never expressed interest in the CEO position. She wouldn't, Marcus pointed out. Not while you're still active. But she has all the qualities we need: intelligence, integrity, institutional knowledge. And she embodies the values you talked about in your speech. The more I thought about it, the more the idea appealed to me. Jennifer had stood by me through the darkest days of Richard's betrayal, had helped rebuild the company's security and reputation afterward. She understood both the business side and the community responsibility that had always been central to Camden Manufacturing's identity. Most importantly, she had no expectation of inheriting leadership. Unlike Richard, she would see the CEO position not as an entitlement, but as a privilege to be earned, a responsibility to be shouldered. If you've been following the story, subscribe now and comment if you believe that sometimes our greatest triumphs come after our most devastating losses. It's an interesting suggestion, I told Marcus. Let me think about it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and small talk. By the time my driver brought me home, it was well past midnight. The house was dark and silent, as always, but somehow it felt less empty than it had in months. Perhaps it was the validation of the award, or the unexpected catharsis of speaking honestly about Richard in such a public forum. Or perhaps it was simply the growing realization that I was, at long last, making peace with a future very different from the one I had planned. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Jennifer. Congratulations again on the award. Your speech moved many people tonight, myself included. When you're ready, I'd like to discuss something important. No rush. Rest well. The timing of the message, coming just after Marcus had mentioned the board's interest in Jennifer as a potential successor, seemed almost too perfect to be coincidental. Had she already been approached? Was she about to tell me she was considering other opportunities? The thought of losing Jennifer, one of the few constants in my life since Richard's betrayal, sent an unexpected pang through me. I had come to rely on her not just professionally but personally, her steady presence a ballast during the stormy aftermath of scandal and grief. I texted back, "Thank you. Breakfast tomorrow? My house, 9 a.m. Her reply came almost immediately, "I'll be there." Sleep came easily that night, perhaps aided by the emotional release of the award speech, perhaps by the champagne at the reception, or perhaps simply by the bone-deep exhaustion of maintaining public composure for an entire evening. Whatever the reason, I slept more soundly than I had in months, undisturbed by the nightmares of Richard's betrayal that had plagued me since his death. Morning arrived with gentle summer sunshine streaming through my bedroom windows. I rose feeling rested and curiously optimistic, as if the award ceremony had marked not just professional recognition but a personal turning point as well. By the time Jennifer arrived, I had prepared a simple breakfast: coffee, fresh fruit, and croissants from the bakery down the street. We ate on the terrace, enjoying the perfect June weather and making small talk about the previous evening's event. Finally, as we lingered over second cups of coffee, I broached the subject of her message. "You mentioned wanting to discuss something important." Jennifer set down her cup, suddenly looking nervous, an unusual expression for someone normally so composed.
Yes.
It's about the future. My future, specifically. Here it was, the resignation I had feared, The announcement that she had been recruited by another company or perhaps was leaving the corporate world entirely. I steeled myself for the news, already mentally calculating how her departure would affect ongoing projects and team dynamics. "I've been approached about a new position," she continued, confirming my fears. "It would be a significant step up in terms of responsibility and compensation." "I see," I said, keeping my voice neutral despite my disappointment. "May I ask where?" Jennifer looked surprised.
Where?
"At Camden, of course. Mrs. Camden, Eleanor, the board has suggested that I might be considered as your eventual successor. They've asked if I would be interested in being groomed for the CEO position over the next few years." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by amusement at my own misreading of the situation.
Ah,
"Yes, Marcus mentioned their interest last night. I wanted to speak with you directly before responding," Jennifer explained. "This isn't something I've been angling for or expecting, and I would only consider it with your full support." Her straightforwardness was refreshing. No political maneuvering, no attempt to leverage the board's interest against me. Just honest communication and respect for the relationship we had built over 15 years of working together. "What are your thoughts about it?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Is leading Camden Manufacturing something you would want?" Jennifer took a moment to consider the question, her thoughtfulness another quality that distinguished her from Richard, who would have jumped at the opportunity without a second's reflection. "I believe in what Camden stands for," she said finally. "The commitment to quality, to community, to doing business with integrity. I've invested a significant portion of my career in helping to protect and advance those values." She paused, meeting my gaze directly. "But I'm not a Camden. I don't have the family connection to the company's history. Some might see that as a disadvantage." "Or as an advantage," I countered, "given recent events." A shadow crossed her face, a reflection of the pain we had all experienced during Richard's betrayal and its aftermath. "I would never presume to compare myself to—" "Good," I interrupted gently, "because there is no comparison. Richard was raised with every expectation that he would someday lead Camden Manufacturing. That expectation shaped him, and not always for the better. You've earned every step of your advancement through hard work and integrity." Jennifer nodded, accepting the assessment. "If I were to accept this path," she said carefully, "I would want your involvement every step of the way. Your mentorship, your honest feedback, your institutional knowledge is irreplaceable." The request touched me deeply. After decades of leadership, the prospect of a gradual transition rather than an abrupt retirement appealed to me. I could share the wisdom accumulated over a lifetime in business, without the pressure of day-to-day operations. I could ensure that Camden Manufacturing's values remained intact without clinging to control. "I think you would make an excellent CEO," I said simply, "and I would be honored to help prepare you for the role." The relief on Jennifer's face was palpable. "Thank you," she said softly. "Your confidence means everything." As we continued our breakfast, discussing the practical aspects of what such a transition might look like, I found myself reflecting on the strange symmetry of life. A year ago, I had been in the ICU, overhearing my son dismiss me as already half dead. Now I was planning for a future he had never imagined, one where Camden Manufacturing would continue to thrive under leadership based not on family connection, but on shared values. It wasn't the legacy I had spent decades planning for, but perhaps it was the one I needed to leave. The transition plan we developed over the following months was comprehensive, but unhurried. Jennifer would gradually assume more of my responsibilities while I focused on strategic initiatives and mentorship. The board approved the arrangement unanimously, relieved to have a clear succession plan after the uncertainty of the past year. Employees responded positively to the announcement, many expressing that Jennifer's promotion represented a natural evolution rather than a dramatic change. She had earned their respect through years of collaborative work and decisive leadership during the crisis following Richard's betrayal. The press was less restrained in its analysis. Business publications ran profiles of Jennifer with headlines like "Camden's non-family successor signals new direction after scandal" and "Manufacturing matriarch chooses merit over bloodline." I declined all requests for interviews about the decision, allowing Jennifer to establish her own public persona without my shadow looming over her. Privately, I took satisfaction in watching her grow into the role. Jennifer had always been competent and dedicated, but as she assumed more authority, a new confidence emerged, a willingness to make difficult decisions, to challenge established practices when necessary, to articulate her own vision while honoring the company's history. 6 months into the transition, we faced our first significant test when our largest client threatened to take their business to a competitor offering marginally lower prices. In the past, I would have handled such negotiations personally, drawing on decades of relationship building and industry knowledge. Now, I watched from the sidelines as Jennifer took the lead. She invited the client's representatives to tour our manufacturing facilities, to meet the skilled workers who crafted the precision components their company relied on. She demonstrated the quality control processes that ensured our products outperformed industry standards. And when the discussion turned to pricing, she offered creative solutions, volume discounts, streamlined delivery schedules, collaborative product development that preserved Camden's profit margins while giving the client meaningful value beyond the simple cost per unit. By the time the meeting concluded, not only had the client recommitted to Camden manufacturing, they had expanded their order by 15%. "Well done," I told Jennifer afterward, genuine pride warming my voice. "Robert would have approved of your approach." She looked pleased but slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "I learned from the best," she said, deflecting attention back to me.
No, y correctament.
"You observed and then found your own way. That's much more valuable than simply imitating my methods." It was a crucial distinction, one that Richard had never understood. He had seen leadership as a role to be inherited rather than a capacity to be developed, had expected authority without earning trust, had demanded power without demonstrating responsibility. Jennifer, by contrast, was creating her own leadership style, one that honored Camden's traditions while introducing fresh perspectives. She was proving that the company could evolve without losing its essential character, could innovate without abandoning its core values. As the 1-year anniversary of Richard's death approached, I found myself thinking more often about the son I had lost, not just to the bullet that had ended his life, but to the greed and resentment that had corrupted his character long before. There were moments, usually in the quiet of evening when I was alone with my thoughts, when grief would wash over me unexpectedly, not for the man Richard had become, but for the boy he had been, for the relationship we might have had if different choices had been made. I had not visited his grave since the funeral. The thought of standing at that cold stone marker, trying to reconcile the loving child of my memories with the man who had held a gun to my head, seemed an exercise in futility. But as the anniversary date drew nearer, I felt an increasing pull to make that pilgrimage, to confront whatever emotions might be waiting there. The day itself dawned clear and cool, a perfect early autumn morning. I drove to the cemetery alone, declining Marcus's offer to accompany me. This was a journey I needed to make by myself, a private reckoning with loss and love and lingering questions. Richard's grave was in the Camden family plot, near Robert's. The headstone was simple, name, dates, no epitaph. What words could have captured the complexity of his life and death? What phrase could have acknowledged both the promise of his beginning and the tragedy of his end? I stood there, a small bouquet of lilies in my hand, searching for the right words to speak into the silence. There were no other visitors nearby, just the distant figure of a groundskeeper tending to another section of the cemetery. "Hello, Richard," I said finally, my voice sounding strangely formal even to my own ears. "It's been a year." The observation was banal, but it opened a door. Words began to flow more naturally as I placed the lilies on his grave. "I've been thinking about you, about who you were as a child, so bright, so full of curiosity. You used to follow your father around the factory, asking questions about every machine, every process. He was so proud of your interest, your quick mind." Memories surfaced as I spoke. Richard at 5, solemnly wearing a miniature hard hat during a plant tour. Richard at 10, presenting a crude but imaginative design for an improved valve system. Richard at 16, working a summer job on the production floor, learning the business from the ground up. "Where did we lose you?" I asked softly. "When did money, become more important than meaning? When did power become more valuable than purpose? There was no answer, of course. Just the whisper of wind through nearby trees and the distant sounds of traffic beyond the cemetery walls. I wish you could have found happiness in building something rather than taking something. I continued. I wish you could have known the satisfaction of creating value instead of extracting it. I wish. My voice caught unexpectedly. I wish you could have loved the company the way your father and I did. Not as a possession to be acquired, but as a community to be nurtured. The grief that washed over me then was complex, sorrow not just for Richard's death, but for all the choices that had led him to that final, fatal confrontation. For the son who might have been. For the relationship we might have shared. For the legacy that would now follow a different path than the one I had envisioned for so many years. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in memories and regrets. Eventually, I became aware of another presence nearby. Looking up, I was startled to see Victoria standing a few yards away, her own small bouquet clutched in her hand. She looked different than she had at the holiday party, healthier, more composed. The wild desperation that had marked her then was gone, replaced by a quieter, more grounded demeanor. "Mrs. Camden," she greeted me, her voice soft. "I didn't expect to see you here today."
Victoria.
I nodded, uncertain of the appropriate response. We had not spoken since her arrest, though I knew from Chief Williams that she had completed her court-mandated treatment program and was now living quietly in a nearby town. "How are you?" It was a surprisingly normal question given our history, but it seemed to break some tension between us. Victoria's shoulders relaxed slightly.
"Better," she said simply.
The treatment program, it helped. Made me face some things about myself. About my choices. I nodded, understanding more than she might have realized. Hadn't I been engaged in my own process of reckoning, of sorting through the tangled threads of the past year to find some pattern, some meaning? "May I?" Victoria gestured toward Richard's grave, asking permission to approach even though she had as much right to be there as I did, more, perhaps, as his widow. Of course, I stepped back, giving her space. She placed her flowers beside mine, then stood in silence for a long moment. "I dream about him sometimes," she said finally, her gaze fixed on the headstone. Not the Richard from the end, angry, obsessed, dangerous. But the man I met in business school. Brilliant.
Charming.
Full of plans and dreams. The description matched my own memories of Richard in his early 20s, before disappointment had curdled into resentment, before ambition had twisted into entitlement. "What happened to that man, Victoria?" I asked, voicing the question that had haunted me for months. When did he change? Or was that darkness always there, just hidden beneath the charm? Victoria considered the question with a thoughtfulness that surprised me. The shallow, status-obsessed woman I had known as Richard's wife seemed to have been replaced by someone more reflective, more substantial. "I think," she began slowly, "I think he couldn't reconcile who he wanted to be with who he thought he should be. He had this image of success that was all about acquisition, the right title, the right house, the right amount of money. But deep down, he knew that wasn't really success at all. And that disconnect." I prompted. "It ate at him," Victoria confirmed. "Made him angry, resentful. He blamed everyone else for his unhappiness. You, Robert, the board, me. Anyone but himself." The assessment aligned with my own conclusions, but hearing it from someone who had shared Richard's most private moments gave it additional weight. "I enabled it," Victoria admitted, a flush of shame coloring her cheeks. "Encouraged it even. I wanted the lifestyle his inheritance would provide. The status of being married to a CEO. I didn't care about the company or its values or the people who depended on it." Her candor was unexpected but welcome. There had been too many lies between us already. "And now?" I asked, genuinely curious about her current perspective.
Victoria smiled ruefully.
"Now I work at a nonprofit helping women rebuild their lives after abusive relationships. The irony isn't lost on me." I nodded, acknowledging both her journey and the strange symmetry of her new role. "It sounds like meaningful work." "It is," she agreed. More fulfilling than anything I did in my previous life. She hesitated, then added, "The director knows about my history, about what happened with Richard. She hired me anyway." Said, "Sometimes the people who've made the worst mistakes have the most to offer others who are struggling." The sentiment resonated deeply. Wasn't that the essence of growth? Learning from mistakes, transforming pain into wisdom, using personal experience to help others navigate similar challenges? We stood together in companionable silence for a few minutes, two women united not by affection but by shared history, by parallel processes of healing from the same source of pain. "I should go," Victoria said finally. "My shift starts at noon." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mrs. Camden, Eleanor, I never properly apologized for my part in all this. For encouraging Richard's worst impulses. For standing by while he plotted against you.
I'm truly sorry."
The apology was simple, but seemed sincere. I acknowledged it with a nod. "We all have regrets, Victoria. The question is what we build with the pieces that remain." She smiled faintly, recognizing the philosophy that had guided Camden Manufacturing through decades of challenges. "He could have learned so much from you," she said softly, glancing back at Richard's grave. "If only he'd been willing to listen." After she left, I remained a while longer, reflecting on our unexpected encounter. There was something fitting about meeting Victoria here, at the site of our shared loss. Something healing in the recognition that we had both found ways to move forward, to create meaning from the wreckage of betrayal and violence. As I finally turned to leave, I placed my hand briefly on Richard's headstone, a farewell not just to my son but to the future I had imagined with him at the helm of Camden Manufacturing. That vision had died long before Richard himself, killed by his own choices, his own inability to value what he had been given. In its place, a different future was taking shape, one where the company would continue under Jennifer's leadership, guided by the values Robert and I had established, but evolving to meet new challenges. One where the Camden legacy would be defined not by bloodline but by character, not by inheritance but by earned trust. It wasn't the future I had planned. But standing there in the gentle autumn sunshine, I realized it might be something better, a testament not to what we leave to our children, but to what we leave for all children. A legacy of integrity, purpose, and resilience in the face of betrayal. That, I thought as I walked back to my car, was something worth building. 3 years later, I stood at the podium in the newly constructed Camden Community Center, addressing the gathering of employees, community members, and local officials who had come to celebrate the facility's grand opening. When Robert and I founded Camden Manufacturing 61 years ago, we had 2 goals: to build excellent products and to create a company that would strengthen this community. Today, we take another step toward fulfilling that second goal. The center, a sleek, modern building funded by the Camden Foundation, would provide educational programs, healthcare services, and recreational facilities for the entire community, with special emphasis on serving families of Camden employees. This center represents our commitment to the belief that a successful company measures its achievements not just in profits, but in positive impact, I continued. Not just in what we make, but in the lives we touch. From my vantage point on the stage, I could see Jennifer in the front row, her expression a mixture of pride and anticipation. At 48, she had fully grown into her role as CEO, leading Camden Manufacturing through 3 years of record growth while strengthening its reputation for ethical business practices. The transition of leadership had been completed the previous year, with my official retirement marked by a company-wide celebration. I had retained my position as chair of the board and head of the Camden Foundation, roles that kept me connected to the company without interfering with Jennifer's authority. It was a balance that worked well for both of us. Jennifer had the freedom to implement her vision while still benefiting from my experience and institutional knowledge. I had the satisfaction of seeing Camden Manufacturing evolve under capable leadership while focusing my energy on projects like the community center that had special meaning to me. Robert would have been proud to see this day. I concluded my brief remarks. Proud of what Camden Manufacturing has become. Proud of the difference we continue to make in this community. And most of all, Proud of all of you who have helped bring his vision to life." The applause was warm and genuine, reflecting the strong bonds that had developed between the company and the community over 6 decades. As I stepped away from the podium, making way for the mayor's speech, Jennifer squeezed my hand in silent acknowledgement. Later, as we toured the completed facility, she shared some news that had been under wraps until the center's opening. "The board approved the expansion into medical devices," she told me, referring to a strategic initiative she had been developing for months. "We'll break ground on the new facility next quarter." The expansion represented a significant evolution for Camden manufacturing, a move into a higher-value market that built on our expertise in precision components while opening new avenues for growth. It was bold but grounded in careful analysis and planning, exemplifying Jennifer's leadership style. "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "It's a smart move. The right direction for the company's future." Jennifer nodded, pleased by my approval though no longer dependent on it. "We'll need to hire at least 50 new employees initially, with potential for more as production ramps up." "Good news for the community," I observed, thinking of the families who would benefit from those jobs, the children who would be educated in better schools thanks to the expanded tax base, the local businesses that would serve the new employees, the overall strengthening of the economic fabric that had always been integral to Camden's mission. This was the legacy Robert and I had truly created, not just a successful company, but a positive force in the lives of thousands of people across generations. Not just products, but purpose. Not just profit, but impact. As we completed our tour of the community center, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past 4 years. From the betrayal in the ICU to the confrontation in my home, from Richard's death to Victoria's outburst, from the careful transition of leadership to this moment of community celebration, each step had been part of a process of transformation, of finding new meaning in the aftermath of loss. The future stretching before Camden Manufacturing was not the one I had envisioned decades ago, when I had assumed Richard would follow in his father's footsteps. It was something different, something unexpected, something perhaps even better, a future built not on entitlement but on earned trust, not on bloodline but on shared values, not on what was owed but on what was created. Richard's betrayal had nearly destroyed everything Robert and I had built. Instead, it had forced a reckoning that ultimately strengthened the company, clarified its purpose, and opened new possibilities for its future. That evening, after the celebrations had concluded and the community center stood ready to begin its service, I returned home to the Victorian house that had witnessed so much of my life's journey. The rooms that had once echoed with Richard's threats now resonated with a different energy, peaceful, purposeful, forward-looking. In Robert's study, I opened the journal where he had documented his concerns about Richard years before they had become undeniable to me. The final entry, written the day before his death, had once filled me with sadness. Now it struck me as prophetic. "Eleanor still can't see what Richard has become. She remembers the boy, not the man. I've done what I can to protect her and the legacy we've built together. I only hope it's enough. If she's reading this after I'm gone, know this, my love. You are stronger than you believe. Trust your instincts. And remember that the family we choose can be more loyal than the family we're born with." Robert had seen more clearly than I had been willing to, had recognized that our true legacy would not be defined by bloodline, but by the values we instilled in the company and community we had built together. Had understood that the future of Camden Manufacturing might lie in hands not bearing our name, but carrying forward our purpose. As I closed the journal and returned it to its place in the desk drawer, I felt a sense of completion, not an ending, but a circle connecting past, present, and future. Richard's betrayal had broken one vision of legacy, but had ultimately revealed a more meaningful one. The son I had raised had rejected everything I valued, but the company I had built would continue to embody those values long after I was gone. The future I had planned had been shattered by betrayal and violence. But the future taking shape was built on stronger foundations, on earned trust rather than inherited position, on demonstrated character rather than family connection. It wasn't the legacy I had imagined. It was the legacy I had earned. And as I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by memories of the past, but focused on possibilities for the future. I knew it was enough. More than enough. It was, in the end, everything that mattered.